Chapter 1. The one who feels pain or feels hurt when slandered, accused, or false witness borne against him, it is a sign that he still has alive the I of pride. Samael Aun Weor. The didactic of the dissolution of the I. The best didactic for the dissolution of the I is found in practical life intensely lived. Interrelationship is a marvelous mirror in which the I can be contemplated at full length. In relation with our fellow men, the defects that are hidden in the subconscious depths flourish spontaneously. They leap out because the subconscious betrays us, and if we are in a state of alert perception, then we see them just as they are in themselves. For the Gnostic, the best joy is to celebrate the discovery of one of his defects. Discovered defect, dead defect. When we discover a defect, we should see it in the scene as someone who is watching a movie, but without justify or condemn. It is not enough to comprehend the psychological defect intellectually. It is necessary to submerge ourselves into profound inner meditation to catch the defect in the levels of the mind. The mind has many levels and profundities, and as long as we have not comprehended a defect in all the levels of the mind, we will have done nothing, and the latter will continue existing like a tempting demon in the depths of our own subconscious. When a defect is integrally comprehended in all the levels of the mind, then the defect disintegrates, upon disintegrating and reducing to cosmic dust the I that characterizes it. This is how we keep on dying from instant to instant. This is how we keep establishing in ourselves a permanent center of consciousness, a permanent center of gravity. Within every human being who is not in the final state of degeneration exists the Buddhatva, the interior Buddhist principle, the psychic material or materia prima, to fabricate that which is called soul. The pluralized I foolishly spends said psychic material in absurd atomic explosions of envy, covetousness, hatred, jealousies, fornications, attachments, vanity, etc. As the pluralized I dies from instant to instant, the psychic material accumulates within us, becoming a permanent center of consciousness. This is how we individualize ourselves, little by little. By de-egotizing ourselves, we individualize ourselves. However, we clarify that individuality. The work of the dissolution of the I is something very serious. We need to study ourselves profoundly in all the levels of the mind. The I is a book of many chapters. We need to study our dialectic, thoughts, emotions, actions from instant to instant, without justifying or condemning. We need to integrally comprehend in all the profundities of the mind each and every one of our defects. The pluralized I is the subconscious. When we dissolve the I, the subconscious becomes consciousness. We need to convert the subconscious into consciousness, and that is only possible by achieving the annihilation of the I. When the consciousness moves on to occupy the place of the subconscious, we acquire that which is called continuous consciousness. The one who enjoys continuous consciousness lives consciously at every instant, not only in the physical world, but also in the suprasensible worlds during the sleep of the physical body and after death. We need the death of the I. We need to die from instant to instant, here and now, not only in the physical world, but also in all the planes of the cosmic mind. We should be merciless towards ourselves and carry out the dissection of the I with the great scalpel of self-criticism. the struggle of the opposites. A great master said, "Seek enlightenment, for all else will be added on to you." Enlightenment's worst enemy is the I. It is necessary to know that the I is a knot in the flow of existence, a fatal obstruction in the flow of life free in its movement. A master was asked, "Which is the way?" "What a magnificent mountain," he said, referring to the mountain where he had his haven. "I do not ask you about the mountain. Instead, I ask you about the path. As long as you cannot go beyond the mountain, you will not be able to find the way," answered the master. Another monk asked the same question to that same master. "There it is, right before your eyes," the master answered him. "Why can I not see it?" "Because you have egotistical ideas." "Will I be able to see it, sir?" As long as you have a dualistic vision and you say, "I cannot," and so on, your eyes will be blinded by that relative vision. When there is no I nor you, can it be seen? When there is no I nor you, who wants to see? The foundation of the I is the dualism of the mind. The I is sustained by the battle of the opposites. All thinking is founded on the battle of the opposites. If we say, "So-and-so is tall," we want to say that he is not short. If we say that we are entering, we want to say that we are not exiting. If we say that we are happy, with that we affirm that we are not sad, etc. The problems of life are nothing but mental forms with two poles, one positive and the other negative. Problems are sustained by the mind and are created by the mind. When we stop thinking on a problem, the latter ends inevitably. Happiness and sadness, pleasure and pain, good and evil, victory and defeat, constitute the battle of the opposites on which the I is founded. The entire miserable life that we live goes from one opposite to another. Victory, defeat, like, dislike, pleasure, pain, failure, success, this, that, etc. We need to free ourselves of the tyranny of the opposites. This is only possible by learning to live from instant to instant, without abstractions of any type, without dreams, without fantasies. Hast thou observed how the stones of the road are pale and pure after a torrential rain? One can only murmur an "oh" of admiration. We should comprehend that "oh" of things without deforming that divine exclamation with the battle of the opposites. Joshu asked the master Boshu, "What is the Tao?" "Ordinary life," replied Nansen. "What does one do to live in accordance with it?" If you try to live in accordance with it, it will flee away from you. Do not try to sing that song. Let it sing itself. Does not the humble hiccups come by itself? Remember this phrase: Gnosis lives in deeds, withers away in abstractions, and is difficult to find even in the noblest of thoughts. They asked the master Boshu, "Do we have to dress and eat daily? How could we escape from this?" The master replied, "We eat, we get dressed." "I do not understand," said the disciple. "Then get dressed and eat." This is precisely action free of the opposites. Do we eat? Do we get dressed? Why make a problem of that? Why think of other things while we are eating and getting dressed? If you are eating, eat. If you are getting dressed, get dressed. And if you are wall on the street, walk, walk, walk. But do not think of something else. Do only what you are doing. Do not run away from facts. Do not fill them with so many meanings, symbols, sermons, and warnings. Live them without allegories. Live them with a receptive mind from instant to instant. Comprehend that I am talking to you about the path of action, free of the battle of the opposites. Action without distractions, without evasions, without fantasies, without abstractions of any kind. Change thy character, beloved, change it through intelligent action, free of the battle of the opposites. When the doors are closed to fantasy, the organ of intuition is awakened. Action, free of the battle of the opposites, is intuitive action, full action. Where there is plenitude, the I is absent. Intuitive action leads us by the hand to the awakening of consciousness. Let us work and rest happily, abandoning ourselves to the course of life. Let us exhaust the turbid and rotten water of habitual thinking, and in the emptiness will flow Gnosis, and with it the happiness of living. This intelligent action, free of the battle of the opposites, elevates us to a point in which something must break. When everything marches well, the rigid roof of thinking breaks, and the light and the power of the inner self enter like a flood into the mind which has stopped dreaming. Then, in the physical world and outside of it, during the sleep of the material body, we live totally conscious and enlightened, enjoying the joy of life in the superior worlds. This continuous tension of the mind, this discipline, takes us to the awakening of consciousness. If we are eating and thinking about business, it is clear that we are dreaming. If we are driving an automobile and we are thinking of our fiancé, it is logical that we are not awake, we are dreaming. If we are working and we are remembering our child's godfather or godmother, or our friend or brother, etc., it is clear that we are dreaming. People who live dreaming in the physical world also live dreaming in the internal worlds during those hours of rest of the physical body, and also after death. It is painful to know that the consciousness of all human beings sleeps and dreams profoundly, not only during those hours of rest of the physical body, but also during that state ironically called the vigil state. Action free of mental dualism produces the awakening of consciousness. The element man. I have to declare before the solemn verdict of public opinion that the fundamental aim of every Gnostic student is to become a KM, a cosmos man. All of us human beings live in a cosmos. The word cosmos means order, and this is something that we should never forget. The cosmos man is a being who has perfect order in his 5 centers, in his mind and in his essence. In order to get to be a cosmos man, it is necessary to learn to know how the 3 primary forces of the universe, positive, negative, and neutral, manifest themselves. But, on the path which leads to the cosmos man, which is totally positive, we see that every positive force is always opposed by a negative force. Through self-observation, we should perceive the mechanism of the opposing force. Whenever we propose to carry out a special action, whether it be the annihilation of the ego, the dominion of sex, a special work, or execute a definite program, we should observe and calculate the force of resistance, because by nature the world and its mechanics tends to provoke the resistance, and such resistance is double. The more gigantic that the enterprise is, the greater will the resistance be. If we learn to calculate the resistance, we will also be able to develop the enterprise with success. That is where the capacity of the genius, of the enlightened, is. Resistance. Resistance is the opposing force. Resistance is the secret weapon of the ego. Resistance is the psychic force of the ego opposed to us becoming conscious of all our psychological defects. With the resistance, the ego tends to leave on a tangent and postulates excuses to silence or hide the error. Due to resistance, dreams become difficult to interpret, and the knowledge that one wants to have of oneself becomes clouded. Resistance acts upon a defense mechanism which tries to omit unpleasant psychological errors so as not to have consciousness of them, and for one to continue in psychological slavery. But in reality of truth, I have to say that there are mechanisms to overcome resistance, and they are 1. Recognize it. 2. Define it. 3. Comprehend it. 4. Work on it. 5. Overcome and disintegrate it by means of sexual superdynamics. But the ego will struggle during the analysis of the resistance in order for the fallacies not to be discovered, which put in danger the dominion it has over our mind. At the moment of the struggle of the ego, one has to appeal to a power that is superior to the mind, which is the fire of the Kundalini serpent of the Hindu. Practice. With the practice, the experience or the living of any of the works that I have delivered to humanity, the practitioner would achieve, it is obvious, psychological emancipation. There exist people that speak marvels about reincarnation, Atlantis, alchemy, the ego, astral unfoldment, and before the external world they are experts on these matters. But this is only being intellectually informed. Deep down, these persons do not know anything, and at the hour of death, these expositors remain with nothing but knowledge stored in their memory that in the beyond does not serve any purpose, because they continue with their consciousness asleep. If one is only imprisoned in theories, if one has not carried out anything practical, if one has not become conscious of what I have taught in the books, if we leave the teachings in the memory, it can be said that we have wasted our time miserably. Memory is the formative principle of the intellectual center. When a person aspires to something more, when someone looks through the limitations of the subconscious and sees that which he has deposited in the memory and analyzes and meditates on the last occurrence or teachings of an esoteric book, then those values move to the emotional phase of the same intellectual center. When one wants to know the deep meaning of said teachings, and the person surrenders in full to meditation, obviously such teachings move on to the emotional center properly said, and they then come to be felt in the depth of the soul. When one has cleanly lived the teachings, the cognoscible values of the essence, then at last they remain deposited in the consciousness and are never lost again. The essence comes to be enriched with the same. Now we comprehend which is the way to becoming conscious of the Gnostic teachings that I have delivered in the books that I have previously written, and in this one also. Meditation is formidable to make us conscious of the Gnostic teachings, but let us not commit the error of leaving the teachings exclusively in theories or in the memory, because if we proceed in this manner, we will never achieve the dominion of the mind. The requirement. The crude reality of facts comes to demonstrate to us that many are those who have not comprehended the transcendence of the Gnostic esoteric work, and that a great majority are not good householders. When one is not a good householder, it is clear that one is not prepared to enter the path of the razor's edge. In order to work in the revolution of the dialectic, one needs to have reached the level of a good householder. A fanatic, lunatic, whimsical type of person, etc., cannot be good for integral revolution. A subject who does not fulfill the duties of his home cannot achieve the great change. A person who is a bad father, bad wife, or bad husband, or who abandons his home for this or that man or woman, will never be able to arrive at radical transformation. The cornerstone of revolutionary psychology is in the requirement of having a perfect equilibrium at home, whether being a good husband, good father, good brother, and good son. Perfect fulfillment of the duties which exist towards suffering humanity, becoming a decent person. Whoever does not fulfill these requirements will never be able to advance in these revolutionary studies. Defeatism. The intellectual animal, falsely called man, has the fixed idea that the total annihilation of the ego, the absolute dominion of sex, and the intimate self-realization of the being is something fantastic and impossible. However, he does not realize that this very subjective thinking is the fruit of defeatist psychological elements that manipulate the mind and the body of those persons who have not awakened consciousness. The people of this senile and degenerated era carry in their interior a psychic aggregate that is a great obstacle on the path of the annihilation of the ego, and that is defeatism. Defeatist thoughts handicap persons from elevating their mechanistic life to superior states. The majority of persons consider themselves defeated even before beginning the struggle or the Gnostic esoteric work. One has to observe oneself and analyze oneself to discover within oneself, here and now, those facets that make up that which is called defeatism. Synthesizing, we say that there exist three common defeatist attitudes. 1. To feel handicapped because of a lack of intellectual education. 2. To feel incapable of beginning the radical transformation. 3. To walk around with the psychological song, "I never have opportunities to change or to triumph." First attitude. On feeling handicapped because of a lack of education, we have to remember that the great sages such as Hermes Trismegistus, Paracelsus, Plato, Socrates, Jesus the Christ, Homer, etc., never went to university because in the reality of truth, each person has his own master, the latter being the being, that which is beyond the mind and false rationalism. Do not confuse education with wisdom and knowledge. The specific knowledge of the mysteries of life, of the cosmos and of nature, is an extraordinary force that allows us to achieve integral revolution. Second attitude. The robots programmed by the Antichrist materialistic science feel at a disadvantage because they do not feel capable, and this we should analyze. The intellectual animal, because of the influence of a false academic education that adulterates the values of the being, has made in his sensual mind two terrible eyes which should be eliminated. The fixed idea, "I am going to lose," and laziness to practice the Gnostic techniques to acquire knowledge that is needed to emancipate ourselves from all mechanicity and come out, once and for all, from the defeatist tendency. Third attitude. The thinking of the mechanical man is, "Opportunities are never provided to me." The scenes of existence can be modified. One creates his own circumstances. Everything is the result of the law of action and consequence, but with the possibility that a superior law transcends an inferior law. The elimination of the I of defeatism is urgent, undelayable. It is not the quantity of theories that matter. It is the quantity of super efforts that are exerted in the work of the revolution of consciousness. The authentic man fabricates in the moment that he wishes the opportune moments for his spiritual or psychological growth. Psychoastrology. It is written with lit embers in the Book of Life that everyone who achieves the total elimination of the ego can get to change his sign and its influences at will. In the name of truth, I have to declare that the one who is within me has changed signs at will. The sign of my ex-personality was Pisces, but now I am of Aquarius, a terribly revolutionary sign. We cannot deny that the influences of the signs exist and manipulate us as long as the psychological revolution has not been carried out within us. But in the path of every student who aspires to enlightenment, one should begin by revolutionizing oneself against what the horoscopes establish. That matter of one sign not being compatible with another sign is totally absurd, because what is not compatible are the egos, those undesirable elements which we carry within. The astrology of these times of the end is not good for anything, because it is pure business. The authentic astrology of the Chaldean sages has already been forgotten. People machines do not want to change because they say, that is my sign, that is my zodiacal influence, etc. I will never get tired of emphasizing that what is important is to change emotionally and mentally. One needs to change mentally in order for the authentic zodiacal forces which emanate from the being, from the Milky Way, that will give us a permanent center of gravity to penetrate and become manifest in us. We must not seek the light in horoscopes. The light surges forth when we have eliminated from ourselves the particular psychological characteristic trait, and when we have created a new flask, the mind, to pour into it the teachings of psychoastrology, which I have taught in my work Zodiacal Course. The Being and the Divine Mother are the only ones that can emancipate us from newspaper and cheap magazine horoscopes, thus giving us integral education. We have to shake off the dust of the centuries from ourselves and eliminate all our rancid customs and beliefs and leave astrological fanaticism. That it is my zodiacal influence and what remedy does it have is such a subjective manner of thinking, which is a sophism of distraction of the ego. The rhetoric of the ego. By analyzing the three-brained biped called man, we arrive at the logical conclusion that he does not yet have a permanent center of consciousness, of gravity. We cannot affirm that human bipeds are individualized. We are sure that they are only instinctualized. In other words, that they are only impelled by eyes which manipulate the instinctive center at their pleasure. The beloved ego does not have any individuality. It is a sum of discord factors, a sum of small loose cathexis, egotistical psychic energies. Each small I of those which constitute the legion called ego really has its own personal criteria, its own projects, its own ideas, and its own rhetoric. The rhetoric of the ego is the art of speaking well and with elegance, in such a subtle manner that we do not realize at what moment we have already fallen into error. The rhetoric of the ego is so subliminal that due to that reason, our consciousness is as asleep as it is, and without us realizing it. We see the ego with its rhetoric leading countries on an arms race. The volume of heavy commerce, airplanes, warships, and armored transport among the third world countries duplicated between 1973 and 1976, while their imports doubled. Is this, it is appropriate to ask, the adequate road to disarmament and world peace? Quite the contrary, it is the rhetoric of the ego. While human bipeds continue fascinated with inventions and with all the apparent marvels of the Antichrist, materialistic science, in Ethiopia since 1973 to the present, 200,000 persons have died of hunger. Is this civilization? This is the rhetoric of the ego. The human biped only wants to live in his tiny world, which is no longer good for anything. Materialistic psychology, experimental psychology, is good for nothing. The proof is that it has not been able to solve the mental problems which affect the country of the United States. Proof of it is that in the large cities of the American Union, the famous gangs continue multiplying. Let's take a look. In New York City exist the Dirty Ones, a group whose members are of some 30 years of age. They use dirty clothes and leather boots. They meet on house roofs and pride themselves on being considered good billiard players. The Unknown Cyclists, also of more or less the same age, dressed in the fashion of the Hells Angels and wear leather jackets with big zippers. Their bicycles are old Schwinn, which have been adapted with elongated forks to resemble motorcycles. Violence is an accepted part of their lives in each of the thousands of members and gangs which exist in that country, and which, painfully, human bipeds of other countries want to imitate. Is this psychological liberation? False! This is the rhetoric of the ego, which has deceived everyone. It is only by living the teachings which I deliver in this entire authentic treatise of revolutionary psychology, put into practice, that human bipeds will be able to free themselves from the rhetoric of the ego. The permanent center of consciousness. Three-brained bipeds do not have any individuality. They do not have a permanent center of consciousness, PCC. Each of his thoughts, feelings, and actions depend on the calamity of the I, so that at a specific moment it may control the capital centers of the human machine. Those of us who, during many years of sacrifice and pain, have been struggling for the Gnostic movement, were able to see terrible things in practice. With tears in their eyes, many swore to work for Gnosis until the end of their days. They promised eternal fidelity to the great cause and pronounced tremendous speeches. And what happened? What became of their tears of blood? What became of their great oaths? Everything was useless. It was only a fleeting eye of an instant that swore. But when another eye replaced the one that swore fidelity, the individual withdrew from Gnosis, or betrayed the great cause, or joined other little schools betraying the Gnostic institutions. Really, the human being cannot have continuity of purposes because he does not have the PCC. He is not an individual, and he has an I which is a sum of many small eyes. Many are those who await the eternal beatitude with the death of the physical body. However, the death of the body does not resolve the problem of the I. Beyond death, the loose cathexis, the ego, continues enveloped in its molecular body. The human biped ends, but the loose cathexis continues, the energy of the ego in its molecular body, and then later the ego perpetuates itself in our descendants. It returns to satisfy its desires and to continue the same tragedies. The hour has arrived to comprehend the necessity of producing within us a definite integral revolution in order to establish the PCC, a permanent center of consciousness. It is only in this manner that we individualize ourselves. It is only in this manner that we cease being legion. It is only in this manner that we become conscious individuals. The man of today is similar to a ship full of many passengers. Each passenger has his own plans and projects. The man of today does not have a single mind. He has many minds. Each I has its own mind. Fortunately, within the human biped exists something else, the essence. Reflecting seriously on said principle, we can conclude that this is the most elevated psychic material with which we can give shape to our soul. By awakening the essence, we create a soul. To awaken the essence is to awaken conscience. To awaken consciousness is equivalent to creating within us a PCC. Only the one who awakens consciousness becomes an individual. However, the individual is not the end. Later, we have to reach super-individuality. Super-individuality. We need to disegotize ourselves in order to individualize ourselves and then super-individualize ourselves. We need to dissolve the I in order to have the PCC that we studied in the previous chapter. The pluralized I foolishly wastes the psychic material in atomic explosions of anger, covetousness, lust, envy, pride, laziness, gluttony, etc. Once the I is dead, the psychic material accumulates within us, becoming the PCC. Nowadays, the human being, or we should better say the biped that auto-classifies himself as human, is really a machine that is controlled by the legion of the I. Let us observe the tragedy of people in love. How many promises, how many tears, how many good intentions, and what happens? Only the sad memory of all that remains. They marry, time transpires, the man falls in love with another woman, or the wife falls in love with another man, and the castle in the air falls to the ground. Why? Because the human does not yet have his PCC. The small I which swears eternal love is replaced by another small I which has nothing to do with that promise. That is all. We need to become individuals, and this is only possible by creating a PCC. We need to create a PCC, and this is only possible by dissolving the pluralized I. All the inner contradictions of the human being would be enough to drive insane anyone who could see them in a mirror. The source of such contradictions is the plurality of the I. Whoever wants to dissolve the I has to begin by knowing his inner contradictions. Unfortunately, people like deceiving themselves in order not to see their own contradictions. Whoever wants to dissolve the I has to begin by not being a liar. All people are liars unto themselves. Everyone lies to himself. If we want to know the plurality of the I and our perennial contradictions, we should not deceive ourselves. People deceive themselves in order not to see their internal contradictions. With just reason, everyone who discovers his intimate contradictions feels ashamed of himself. He comprehends that he is nobody, that he is a wretched person, a miserable worm of the earth. To discover our own intimate contradictions is already a success because our inner judgment is spontaneously liberated, permitting us to see with clarity the path of individuality and that of super-individuality. Integral well-being, I. We need integral well-being. We all suffer, we have bitterness in life, and we want to change. In any case, I think that integral well-being is the result of self-respect. This would seem quite strange to an economist, to a theosophist, etc. What could self-respect have to do with economic matters, with problems related with labor, or with the labor force, with capital, etc.? I want to comment the following. Our level of being attracts our own life. We used to live in a very beautiful house in Mexico City. Behind that house, there was a very large lot of land which was empty. One ordinary day, a group of parachutists, as we call them, invaded that land. Soon they built their cardboard huts and established themselves there. Unquestionably, they became something dirty in that colony. I do not want to underestimate them, but if their cardboard huts were really clean, I would not object to anything about them. Unfortunately, a frightening lack of hygiene existed among those people. I observed the life of those persons very carefully from the roof of the house. They insulted each other, hurt each other. They did not respect their fellow men. In synthesis, their life was horrifying, with miseries and abominations. If police patrol cars were not seen there before, now the police were always visiting the colony. If that colony was peaceful before, afterwards it became an inferno. In this manner, I was able to evince that the level of being attracts our own life. That is obvious. Let us suppose that one of those inhabitants resolved from one day to the next to respect himself and to respect others. Obviously, he would change. What is understood by respecting oneself? To abandon delinquency, to not steal, to not fornicate, to not commit adultery, to not envy the well-being of one's fellow man, to be humble and simple, abandon laziness and become an active, clean, decent person, etc. Upon respecting himself, a citizen changes his level of being, and upon changing his level of being, he unquestionably attracts new circumstances, for he relates with more decent persons, with different people, and possibly that type of relations provokes an economic and social change in his existence. In this manner, what I am saying would be fulfilled, that integral self-respect provokes social and economic well-being. But if one does not know how to respect himself, he will also not respect his fellow men and will condemn himself to a wretched and unhappy life. The beginning of integral well-being is in self-respect, self-reflection. Let us not forget that the exterior is merely the reflection of the interior. That has already been said by Immanuel Kant, the philosopher of Königsberg. If we carefully study the Critique of Pure Reason, we certainly discover that the exterior is the interior, textual words of one of the great thinkers of all times. The exterior image of man and the circumstances which surround him are the result of self-image. This compound word, self and image, is profoundly significant. Precisely, the photograph of James comes to my memory in these moments. One takes a photograph of our friend James, and is something interesting, two James come out. One that is very still, in a position of attention, with the face looking forward. The other appears walking in front of him, with the face in a different position, etc. How is it possible that two James appear in one photograph? I believe that it is worthwhile to enlarge that photograph, because it can serve to show it to all the persons who become interested in these studies. Obviously, I think that the second James would be the self-reflection of the first James. That is obvious. For it is written that the exterior image of man and the circumstances which surround him are the result of self-image. It is also written that the exterior is merely the reflection of the interior. So, if we do not respect ourselves, if the interior image of ourselves is very poor, if we are full of psychological defects, of moral scum, unquestionably unpleasant events will surge in the exterior world, such as economic, social difficulties, etc. Let us not forget that the exterior image of man and the circumstances which surround him are the result of his self-image. We all have a self-image, and outside exists the physical image, which can be photographed, but within we have another image. To clarify better, we will say that outside we have the physical and perceptible image, and inside we have the image of a psychological and hypersensible type. If outside we have a poor and miserable image, and if this image is accompanied by unpleasant circumstances, a difficult economic situation, problems of all types, conflicts, whether at home, at work, on the street, etc., this is simply because our psychological image is poor, defective, and horrifying, and we reflect our misery, our nothingness, what we are, on the environment. If we want to change, we need a total and great change. Image, values, and identity should change radically. In several of my works, I have said that each of us is a mathematical point in space that agrees to serve as vehicle to a specific sum of values. Some serve as vehicles to genial values, and others could serve as vehicles to mediocre values. That is why each person is each person. The majority of human beings serve as vehicles to the values of the ego, the I. These values can be optimal or negative. Therefore, image, values, and identity are a single whole. I say that we should undergo a radical transformation, and I affirm in an emphatic manner that identity, values, and image should be totally changed. We need a new identity, new values, and a new image. This is psychological revolution, inner revolution. It is absurd to continue within the vicious circle in which we actually move. We need to change integrally. The exterior image of a man originates his exterior image. Upon saying self-image, I am referring to the psychological image that we have within. What could our psychological image be? Could it be that of the irate, of the covetous, of the lustful, of the envious, of the proud, of the lazy, of the glutton, or what? Whichever be the image that we have of ourselves, or we should better say the self-image, will originate, as is natural, the exterior image. The exterior image, even if it is well dressed, could be poor. Is perhaps the image of the proud a beautiful image, of someone who has become unbearable, that does not have a grain of humility? How does a lustful person behave? How does he live? What aspect does his bedroom present? What is his behavior in his or her intimate life with the opposite sex? Or maybe he or she is already degenerated. What could be the external image of an envious person, of someone who suffers because of his fellow man's well-being and who in secrecy causes harm to others out of envy? What is the image of a lazy person who does not want to work and is dirty and abominable? And that of a glutton. Truly, therefore, the exterior image is the result of the interior image, and this is irrefutable. If a man learns to respect himself, he changes his life, not only within the field of ethics or that of psychology, but also within the social, economic, and even political field. But we have to change. That is why I insist that identity, values, and image should be changed. The present identity, values, and image that we have of ourselves are miserable. Due to this, social life is full of conflicts and economic problems. No one is happy nowadays. No one is joyful. But could the image, values, and identity that we have be changed? Could we take up a new identity, new values, and a new image? I clearly affirm that it is possible. Unquestionably, we would need to disintegrate the ego. We all have an I. When we knock on a door, we are asked, "Who is it?" We answer, "Me." But who is that me? Who is that myself? Really and truly, the ego is a sum of negative and positive values. We could disintegrate the ego, put an end to those negative and positive values, and then we could serve as vehicle to new values, the values of the being. But in that case, we need a new didactic if we want to eliminate all the values that we presently have in order to provoke a change. Psychoanalysis. The didactic that exists to know and eliminate the positive and negative values which we carry within exists and is called inner psychoanalysis. It is necessary to appeal to inner psychoanalysis. When one appeals to inner psychoanalysis to know the defects of a psychological type, a great difficulty surges forth. I want to refer emphatically to the force of countertransference. One can investigate oneself. One can introvert oneself, but when one attempts it, the difficulty of countertransference surges. But the solution is in transferring our attention inwards with the purpose of exploring oneself, in order to know ourselves and to eliminate the negative values which harm us psychologically in social life, in economics, politics, and even in the spiritual aspect. Unfortunately, I repeat, when one tries to introvert oneself in order to explore oneself and to know oneself, countertransference immediately surges. Countertransference is a force which makes introversion difficult. If countertransference did not exist, introversion would be easier. We need inner psychoanalysis. We need intimate self-investigation in order to really know ourselves. Homo gnose te ipsum. Man, know yourself, and you will know the universe and the gods. When one knows oneself, one can change. As long as one does not know oneself, any change will result subjective. But before anything else, we need self-analysis. How is the force of countertransference which makes intimate psychoanalysis or self-analysis difficult overcome? This would only be possible by means of transactional analysis and structural analysis. When one appeals to structural analysis, one knows those psychological structures which make intimate introspection difficult and impossible. By knowing such structures, we comprehend them, and by comprehending them, we can then overcome the obstacle. But we need something else. We also need transactional analysis. Bank, commercial transactions, etc. exist in the same manner that psychological transactions exist. The different psychic elements which we carry in our interior are subject to transactions, to exchanges, to struggles, to changes of position, etc. They are not something motionless, they always exist in a state of motion. When one by means of transactional analysis knows the different psychological processes, the different structures, then the difficulty in psychological introspection concludes. Afterwards, the self-exploration of oneself is carried out with full success. The one who achieves full self-exploration of such and such a defect, whether it is to know anger or to know covetousness, lust, laziness, gluttony, etc., can carry out formidable psychological progress. In order to achieve full self-exploration, one will have to first begin by segregating the defect that we want to eliminate from ourselves for it to be dissolved afterwards. A disintegrated defect liberates a percentage of psychic essence. As we disintegrate each of our false values, in other words, our defects, the psychic essence which is bottled up within them will be liberated, and finally, the totally liberated essence will trautically transform us. It will be in that precise instant that the eternal values of the being will be expressed through us. Unquestionably, this would be marvelous not only for ourselves but also for humanity. When we have managed to disintegrate or dissolve the negative values, we will respect ourselves and others, becoming, we would say, a fountain of kindness for the entire world, a perfect, conscious, and marvelous creature. That mystical self-image of an awake man will consequently, or as a corollary, originate the perfect image of a noble citizen. His circumstances will also be beneficial in every sense. He will be a golden link in the great universal chain of life. He will be an example for the entire world, a fountain of joy for many beings, an enlightened one in the most transcendental sense of the word, someone who will enjoy continuous and delightful ecstasy. Mental dynamics. In mental dynamics, we need to know how and why the mind functions. Unquestionably, the mind is an instrument which we should learn to use consciously. But it would be absurd for such an instrument to be efficient if we first did not know the how and why of the mind. When one knows the how and the why of the mind, when one knows the different functionalisms of the mind, one can control it, and the latter becomes a useful and perfect instrument, a marvelous instrument through which we can work for the benefit of humanity. Truly, one needs a realistic system if we really want to know the potential of the human mind. In these times, many systems abound for the control of the mind. There are those who think that certain artificial exercises can be magnificent for the control of the mind. There are schools, much theory exists about the mind. Many systems exist. But how would it be possible to make something useful of the mind? Let us reflect that if we do not know the how and the why of the mind, we will not be able to get the latter to be perfect. We need to know the different functionalisms of the mind if we want the latter to be perfect. How does it function? Why does it function? That how and why are definitive. If, for example, we throw a stone into a lake, we will see that waves are formed. These are the reactions of the lake, of the water, against the stone. Similarly, if someone tells us an ironic word, this word reaches the mind, and the mind reacts against such a word. Conflicts then follow. The entire world is in problems. The entire world lives in conflicts. I have carefully observed the debate panels of many organizations, schools, etc. They do not respect each other. Why? Because they do not respect themselves. Observe a Senate, a Chamber of Representatives, or simply a school board. If someone says something, another feels alluded to, becomes angry, and says something worse. They quarrel among themselves, and the members of the board of directors end up in a great chaos. This reaction of the mind of each of them against the impacts of the exterior world is very serious. One has to truly appeal to introspective psychoanalysis to explore one's own mind. It is necessary to know ourselves a little more within the intellectual sphere. For example, why do we react before the words of a fellow man? In these conditions, we are always victims. If someone wants us to be content, it is enough for that person to give us a few pats on the shoulder and tell us a few amiable words. If someone wants to see us upset, it would be enough to tell us a few unpleasant words. Therefore, where is our true intellectual freedom? Which is it? Suddenly, we are before a person of the opposite sex. We become very identified with that person. Finally, we end up in fornications and adulteries. It means that that person of the opposite sex had the upper hand and overcame our psychological process. That person controlled us, subjected us to his or her own will. Is this freedom? The intelligent animal, falsely called man, in the reality of truth, has been educated to deny his identity, values, and image. Which is the authentic identity, values, and image of each of us? Is it perhaps the ego or the personality? No. By means of introspective psychoanalysis, we can go beyond the ego and discover the being. Unquestionably, the being in himself is our authentic identity, values, and image. The being in himself is the KM, the cosmos man, or man-cosmos. Unfortunately, as I have already said it, the animal, falsely called man, has educated himself to deny his inner values, has fallen into the materialism of this degenerate era, has surrendered himself to all the vices of the earth, and treads the path of error. To accept the negative culture subjectively inspired in our interior, following the path of least resistance, is an error. Unfortunately, people of today enjoy following the path of least resistance and accept the false materialistic culture of these times. They allow it to become installed in their psyche, and this is how they arrive at the denial of the true values of the being. The laconic action of the being. The laconic action of the being is the concise manifestation, the brief actuation which the real being of each of us carries out in a manner that is synthetic, mathematical, and exact, like a Pythagorean table. I want you to reflect very well on the laconic action of the being. Remember that above, in infinite space, in the starry space, every action is the result of an equation and an exact formula. Likewise, from mere logical deduction, we should emphatically affirm that our true image, the inner cosmic man, is beyond false values, is perfect. Unquestionably, each action of the being is the result of an equation and exact formula. There have been cases in which the being has succeeded in expressing himself through someone who has achieved a change of image, values, and identity, and then that someone has in fact become a prophet, an enlightened one. But there have also been lamentable cases of persons who have served as vehicles of the being himself, and in truth have not comprehended the intentions of the divine. When someone who serves as a vehicle of the being does not work disinterestedly in favor of humanity, he has not understood that he is an equation and an exact formula of every laconic action of the being. Only the one who renounces the fruits of action, who does not expect any reward whatsoever, who is only motivated by love to work in favor of his fellow men, has certainly comprehended the laconic action of the being. I repeat, we need to undergo a total change of ourselves. Image, values, and identity should change. How beautiful it is to have the young image of a terrestrial man. But we should, and it's better to have the spiritual and celestial image here and now in flesh and bones. Instead of possessing the values of the ego, the positive values of the being should be in our heart and in our mind. Instead of having a gross identity, we should have the identity placed at the service of the being. Let us reflect on the necessity of becoming the living expression of the being. The being is the being, and the reason of the being is being itself. Let us clearly distinguish between what expression is and what self-expression is. The ego can express itself, but it will never have self-expression. The ego is expressed through the personality, and its expressions are subjective. It says what others said. It narrated what others narrated. It explained what others explained, but it does not have the evident self-expression of the being. The real objective self-expression of the being is what matters. When the being expresses himself through us, he does it in a perfect and laconic manner. We have to disintegrate the ego on the basis of inner psychoanalysis in order for the verb, the word of the being, to be expressed through us. Self-esteem. Much is said about feminine vanity. Really, vanity is the living manifestation of self-esteem. The woman before a mirror is a complete narcissus, adoring herself, worshiping herself with frenzy. The woman adorns herself the best way she can. She paints herself. She curls her hair, the only purpose being for others to say, "You are gorgeous, you are beautiful, you are divine," etc. The eye always enjoys it when people admire it. The eye adorns itself in order for others to admire it. The eye believes it is beautiful, pure, ineffable, holy, virtuous, etc. No one believes himself to be evil. All people consider themselves good and just. Self-esteem is something terrible. For example, the fanatics of materialism do not accept the superior dimensions of space due to self-esteem. They love themselves too much, and as is natural, they demand that the superior dimensions of space, of the cosmos, and of all ultra-sensible life subject themselves to their personal whims. They are not capable of going beyond their narrow criteria and their theories, beyond their beloved ego and their mental precepts. Death does not resolve the fatal problem of the ego. Only the death of the eye can resolve the problem of human pain, but the eye loves itself too much and does not want to die in any way. As long as the eye exists, the wheel of samsara, the fatal wheel of human tragedy, will turn. When we are really in love, we renounce the eye. In life, it is very rare to find someone who is really in love. Everyone is impassioned, and that is not love. People become impassioned when they meet someone they like, but when they discover their same errors, qualities, and defects in the other person, then the loved one serves them as a mirror in which they can contemplate themselves totally. Really, they are not in love with the loved one. They are only in love with themselves, and they enjoy seeing themselves in the mirror which the loved one is. That is where they meet, and then suppose that they are in love. The eye enjoys itself before the glass mirror, or feels happy seeing itself in the person that has its same qualities, virtues, and defects. Preachers speak much about the truth, but is it perhaps possible to know the truth when self-esteem exists in us? It is only by putting an end to self-esteem. It is only with the mind free of assumptions that we can experience in the absence of the I that which is the truth. Many will criticize this work, the revolution of the dialectic. As always, pseudo-sapient persons will laugh at the revolutionary statements due to the crime of these teachings not coinciding with the mental assumptions and complicated theories that they have in their memories. Erudite persons are not capable of listening to revolutionary psychology with a spontaneous mind, free of mental assumptions, theories, preconceptions, etc. They are not capable of opening themselves up to what is new with an integral mind, with a mind that is not divided by the battle of the antithesis. Erudite persons only listen in order to compare with their assumptions stored in the memory. Erudite persons only listen to translate according to their language of prejudices and preconceptions, and to arrive at the conclusion that the teachings of the revolution of the dialectic are fantasies. This is how erudite persons are always. Their minds are already so degenerated that they are not capable of discovering what is new. In its arrogance, the I wants everything to coincide with its theories and mental assumptions. The I wants all its whims to be fulfilled, and for the cosmos in its totality to subject itself to its laboratory experiments. The ego despises everyone who hurts its self-esteem. The ego adores its theories and preconceptions. Many times we despise someone without any reason. Why? Simply because that person personifies some errors which we carry well hidden, and we do not like another person to exhibit them. Really, deep within us, we carry the errors which we blame on others. No one is perfect in this world. We are all cut by the same scissors. Each of us is a bad shell within the bosom of the great reality. The one who does not have a defect in a specific direction has it in another direction. Some do not covet money, but they covet fame, honors, love affairs, etc. Others do not commit adultery with someone else's wife, but they enjoy altering doctrines, mixing creeds in the name of the universal fraternity. Some are not jealous of their own wife, but they are jealous of friendships, creeds, sects, things, etc. This is how human beings are, always cut by the same scissors. There is not a human being who does not adore himself. We have listened to individuals who enjoy entire hours and hours talking about themselves, of their marvels, of their talent, of their virtues, etc. The ego loves itself so much that it gets to envy others' well-being. Women adorn themselves with many things, partly out of vanity, and partly to awaken envy in other women. They all envy each other. They all envy the other's dress, the beautiful necklace, etc. They all adore themselves and do not want to see themselves as less than the others. They are 100% narcissists. Some pseudo-occultists, or brothers of many sects, adore themselves so much that they have got to believe themselves as being fountains of humility and sanctity. They feel proud of their own humility. They are terribly proud. There is not a pseudo-occultist little brother or little sister who deep within does not presume of sanctity, splendor, and spiritual beauty. No pseudo-occultist brother or sister believes he or she is evil or perverse. They all presume of being saints and perfect, even when they are really not only evil, but perverse as well. The beloved ego adores itself too much and presumes, even when it does not say it, of being good and perfect. Ahimsa, non-violence. Ahimsa is the pure thought of India, non-violence. Ahimsa is really inspired by universal love. Himsa means to want to kill, to want to harm. Ahimsa is therefore the renunciation of all intention of death or harm caused by violence. Ahimsa is the opposite of egotism. Ahimsa is absolute altruism and love. Ahimsa is upright action. Mahatma Gandhi made of ahimsa the staff of his political doctrine. Gandhi defined the manifestation of ahimsa in this manner. Non-violence does not consist in renouncing all real struggle against evil. Non-violence, as I conceive it, establishes a more active campaign against evil than the law of the talion, whose nature itself results in the development of perversity. I raise before the immoral a mental opposition, and consequently a moral one. I tried to whet the tyrant's sword, not by clashing it against a better sharpened steel, but by disappointing his Ahimsa, non-violence. Ahimsa is the pure thought of India, non-violence. Ahimsa is really inspired by universal love. Himsa means to want to kill, to want to harm. Ahimsa is therefore the renunciation of all intention of death or harm caused by violence. Ahimsa is the opposite of egotism. Ahimsa is absolute altruism and love. Ahimsa is upright action. Mahatma Gandhi made of ahimsa the staff of his political doctrine. Gandhi defined the manifestation of ahimsa in this manner. Nonviolence does not consist in renouncing all real struggle against evil. Nonviolence, as I conceive it, establishes a more active campaign against evil than the law of the talion, whose nature itself results in the development of perversity. I raise before the immoral a mental opposition, and consequently a moral one. I try to whet the tyrant's sword, not by clashing it against a better sharpened steel, but by disappointing his hopes, by not offering any physical resistance. He will find in me a resistance of the soul, which will escape his assault. This resistance will first of all blind him, and immediately force him to surrender. And the act of surrendering will not humiliate the aggressor, but will dignify him. There is not more powerful weapon than a well-directed mind. The ego is the one that disunites, betrays, and establishes anarchy within poor suffering humanity. Egotism, treason, and the lack of brotherhood has divided humanity. The I was neither created by God, nor by the Spirit, nor by matter. The I was created by our own mind, and will cease to exist when we have comprehended it totally in all the levels of the mind. It is only through upright action, upright meditation, upright will, upright means of earning a living, upright effort, and upright memory that we can dissolve the I. It is urgent to comprehend in depth all of this if we really want the revolution of the dialectic. The personality should not be confused with the I. Really, the personality is formed during the 7 years of infancy, and the I is the error that is perpetuated from century to century, fortifying itself more and more each time with the mechanics of recurrence. The personality is energetic, is born with habits, customs, ideas, etc. during infancy, and is fortified with the experiences of life. Both the personality as well as the I should be disintegrated. We are more revolutionary in the psychological teachings than Gurdjieff and Uspensky. The I utilizes the personality as an instrument of action. Personalism results from that mixture of ego and personality. Personality worship was invented by the I. Really, personalism engenders egoisms, hatreds, violences, etc. All of this is rejected by ahimsa. Personalism totally ruins esoteric organizations. Personalism produces anarchy and confusion. Personalism can totally destroy any organization. In each reincarnation, return, the ego fabricates a new personality. Each person is different in each new re-embodiment. It is urgent to know how to live. When the I is dissolved, the great reality, true happiness, that which has no name, comes to us. Let us distinguish between the being and the I. The man of today only has the I. Man is a being that is not yet attained. It is urgent to attain the being. It is necessary to know that the being is limitless happiness. It is absurd to say that the being is the superior I, the divine I, etc. The being of a universal and cosmic type, cannot have the flavor of ego. Let us not try to make the I divine. Ahimsa is nonviolence in thought, word, and deed. Ahimsa is respect for others' ideas, respect for all religions, schools, sects, organizations, etc. Let us not expect the I to evolve, because the I never perfects itself ever. We need a total revolution of consciousness. This is the only type of revolution that we accept. The doctrine of ahimsa is based on the revolution of the dialectic. on the revolution of consciousness. As we die from instant to instant, harmony among men slowly develops. As we die from moment to moment, the sense of cooperation keeps on totally replacing the sense of competition. As we die from moment to moment, goodwill replaces ill will little by little. Men of goodwill accept ahimsa. It is impossible to initiate a new order in our psyche while excluding the doctrine of nonviolence. Ahimsa should be cultivated in homes by following the path of the perfect marriage. It is only with nonviolence in thought and deed that happiness can reign in homes. Ahimsa should be the foundation of daily living, at the office, at the workshop, in the countryside, at home, on the street, etc. We should live the doctrine of nonviolence. Gregarious conduct. Gregarious conduct is the tendency that the human machine has to mix with others without distinction and without control of any type. Let us see what one does when in a group or in multitudes. I am sure that very few persons would dare to go out into the street to throw stones at someone. However, when in a group, they do so. Someone can slip into a public demonstration and, on being fired up with enthusiasm, ends up joining the masses in throwing stones, although later he will ask himself, "Why did I do it?" When in a group, the human being behaves very differently. He does things that he would never do when alone. What is this due to? It is due to negative impressions to which he opens the doors, and he ends up doing things that he would never do alone. When one opens the doors to negative impressions, he not only alters the order of the emotional center, which is in the heart, but he also makes it negative. One opens his doors, for example, to a negative emotion that a person brings full of anger because someone hurt him. Then we end up aligning ourselves with that person against the other who hurt him and also full of anger, without playing any role in the matter. Let us suppose that one opens the doors to the negative impressions of a drunkard. One ends up accepting a drink, then 2, 3, 10. In conclusion, one ends up a drunkard also. Let us suppose that one opens the doors to the negative impressions of a person of the opposite sex. One ends up, most probably, fornicating and committing all types of transgressions. If we open the doors to the negative impressions of a drug addict, we end up maybe smoking marijuana or consuming some type of enervators. As a conclusion, failure will come. In this manner, human beings infect each other within negative atmospheres. Thieves make other persons into thieves. Murderers infect someone else. Drug addicts infect other people. And drug addicts, thieves, usurers, murderers, etc. multiply. Why? Because we commit the error of always opening our doors to negative emotions, and that is never right. Let us select our emotions. If someone brings us positive emotions of light, of beauty, of harmony, of happiness, of love, of perfection, let us open the doors of our heart to him. But if someone brings us negative emotions of hate, violence, jealousy, of drugs, alcohol, of fornication and adultery, why should we open the doors of our heart? Let us close them. When one reflects on gregarious conduct, one can modify it perfectly and make something better out of life. The deformation of the word. The sound of a cannon, its explosion, destroys the glass of a window. On the other hand, a soft word pacifies anger or wrath. But an insulting, inharmonious word produces anger or melancholy, sadness, hatred, etc. It is said that silence is gold, but it is better to say that it is as incorrect to speak when one should be silent as it is to be silent when one should speak. There are criminal silences, there are infamous words, One should calculate with nobility the result of spoken words, for oftentimes one hurts others with words in an unconscious manner. Words full of ill-intended meaning produce fornications in the world of the mind, and arrhythmic words engender violence in the world of the cosmic mind. One should never condemn anyone with the verb, because one should never judge anyone. Slander, gossip, and calumny have filled the world with pain and bitterness. If we work with sexual superdynamics, we have to comprehend that the creative energies are exposed to all kinds of modifications. These energies of the libido can be modified into powers of light or darkness. It all depends on the quality of the words. The perfect man speaks words of perfection. The Gnostic student who wishes to follow the path of the revolution of the dialectic should become accustomed to controlling the tongue. One should learn to handle the verb. It is not what enters the mouth that causes harm to man, but rather what comes out of it. The mouth supplies insults, intrigues, defamation, calumny, debates. All of these are what harm man. Avoid all types of fanaticism because we cause great harm to man, to our fellow men with it. One does not only hurt others with insulting words or with fine and artistic ironies, but also with the tone of the voice, with the inharmonious and arrhythmic accent. Knowing how to listen. We have to learn to listen. In order to learn to listen, we have to awaken consciousness. In order to learn to listen, we have to know how to be present. The one who listens always escapes via his psychological country and city. The human personality does not know how to listen, neither does the physical body, because it is its vehicle. People are full of themselves, of their pride, of their faculties, of their theories. There is not a little corner or empty space for knowledge, for the verb. We should have our bowl facing upwards like the Buddha to receive the Christic word. Psychological listening is very difficult. We have to learn to be attentive in order to know how to listen. We have to become more receptive to the word. People do not remember their previous existences because they are not in their psychological house, because they are outside of it. One has to remember oneself. One has to relax the body as many times as we can during the day. People commit many errors because of forgetting the being. Great things happen to one when one remembers oneself. Consultation is necessary, but the important thing is to know how to listen. In order to know how to listen, one has to have the emotional, motor, and intellectual centers in supreme attention. False education impedes one from listening. False education harms the 5 centers of the human machine: the intellectual, motor, emotional, instinctive, and sexual centers. One has to listen with a spontaneous mind, free of mental assumptions, theories, and preconceptions. One has to open oneself to what is new with an integral mind, with the mind not divided by the battle of the antithesis. The exactness of the term. As the basis of his dialectic, Socrates demanded precision of terminology. In our revolution of the dialectic, we demand precision of the verb as a basis. The word, a distinguishing feature of humans, is the instrument of individual expression and communication among men. It is the vehicle of exterior language and the discharge or exteriorization of the complicated interior language, which can both be utilized by the being or by the ego. Plato, in the dialogue Phaedo, expressed to one of his disciples a concept which is famous for its profundity and moral delicacy as a human principle of idiomatic propriety. It says as follows: "Be it known unto you, my dear Crito, that speaking in an improper manner is not only committing a fault in what is said, but also a taint of damage which is caused to the souls." If we want to resolve problems, we should abstain from expressing one's opinion. Every opinion can be debated. We should resolve a problem by meditating on it. It is necessary to resolve it with the mind and the heart. We should learn to think for ourselves. It is absurd to repeat like parrots the opinions of others. When the ego is annihilated, the optional processes of the mind disappear. An opinion is the emission of a concept out of fear that another concept might be the truth, and this indicates ignorance. It is urgent to learn to not identify with problems. It is necessary to explore ourselves sincerely and then maintain mental and verbal silence. The psychological robot. The intellectual animal is similar to a robot programmed by mechanical wheels, and he is also similar to a clock because he keeps repeating the same movements of past existences. The human being, falsely called man, is a psychological robot who does nothing. Everything happens to him. The being is the only one who does. The being causes to surge what he wants because he is not a mechanical entity. One has to cease being an intellectual robot because a robot always repeats the same thing. He does not have independence. The psychological robot is influenced by the laws of the moon: recurrence, conception, death, hatred, egoism, violence, conceit, haughtiness, self-importance, and immoderate covetousness, etc. One has to work with sexual superdynamics in order to create a permanent center of gravity and to become independent of the moon. In order to cease being a psychological robot, it becomes necessary to dominate oneself. Faust achieved it, but Cornelius Agrippa did not achieve it because he set himself to theorize. People are interested in exploiting the world, but what is more important is to exploit oneself, because the one who exploits himself dominates the world. The psychological robot who wants to become a man and then a superman should develop the capacity of sustaining the notes. When someone really wants to cease being a machine, he has to undergo the first crisis, mi, fa, and then undergo the second crisis, la, si. The key of winners to pass the crisis and to cease being a psychological robot is choice, change, and decision. The entire work is done in 7 scales, and one acquires the neuronionic sound of the universe. Anger. Anger annihilates the capacity to think and resolve the problems it originates. Obviously, anger is a negative emotion. 2 negative emotions of anger that confront each other do not achieve peace nor creative comprehension. Unquestionably, when we project anger onto another human being, a crumbling of our image is always produced, and this is never convenient in the world of the interrelations. The diverse processes of anger lead the human being towards horrible social, economic, and psychological failures. It is clear that one's health is also affected by anger. There exist certain foolish persons who enjoy anger, since it gives them a certain air of superiority. In these cases, anger is combined with pride. Anger is also usually combined with conceit, and even with self-sufficiency. Kindness is a much more crushing force than anger. An angry argument is nothing but excitement, lacking conviction. On confronting anger, we should decide. We should choose the type of emotion that is most convenient thus. Whoever lets himself be controlled by anger destroys his own image. The man who has complete self-control will always be on top. Frustration, fear, doubt, and guilt originate the processes of anger. Frustration, fear, doubt, and guilt cause anger. Whoever liberates himself from these four negative emotions will dominate the world. To accept negative passions is something that goes against self-respect. Anger is of crazy persons. It serves no purpose. It leads us to violence. The goal of violence is to lead us to violence, and the latter produces more violence. The personality. The personality is multiple and has many hidden depths. In it is deposited the karma of previous existences, karma in the process of fulfillment or crystallization. The impressions which are not digested become new psychic aggregates, and what is more serious, they become new personalities. The personality is not homogeneous, but rather heterogeneous and plural. One should select impressions in the same manner that one chooses the things of life. If one forgets oneself at a given instant, before a new event, new I are formed, and if they are very strong, they become new personalities within the personality. Therein lies the cause of many traumas, complexes, and psychological conflicts. An impression which is not digested, which gets to form a personality within the personality, and which is not accepted, becomes a source of frightening conflicts. Not all the personalities which one carries in the personality are accepted, the latter giving origin to many traumas, complexes, phobias, etc. Before all else, it is necessary to comprehend the multiplicity of the personality, that it is multiple in itself. Therefore, there could be someone who may have disintegrated the psychic aggregates, but if he does not disintegrate the personality, he will not be able to attain authentic enlightenment and the joy of living. When one knows oneself more and more, one knows others more and more each time. The individual with an ego does not see things clearly and makes mistakes. Those who have ego fail because they lack judgment, even when a tremendous logic exists in their analysis. If impressions are not digested, new I are created. One has to learn to select impressions. It is not a matter of being better. What interests us is change. The being surges forth when one has changed and ceased to exist. The undesirable elements which we carry in our interior are the ones which control our perceptions, preventing us from having an integral perception which brings us joy and happiness. Dissolving the loose cathesis. It is only by minutely studying the loose cathesis, the I, that we can totally dissolve it. We should minutely observe the thought processes, the different functionalisms of desire, the habits which form our personality, the sophisms of distraction, the fallacy of the ego, and our sexual impulses. We have to study how they react before the impacts of the exterior world and see how they associate with each other. By comprehending all the processes of the loose cathesis, of the pluralized I, the latter is dissolved. Then only the divinity is manifested through and within us. Mystical death. We have suffered much with the members of the Gnostic movement. Many have sworn fidelity before the altar of the sanctuaries. Many have solemnly promised to work in the great work until total self-realization. Many are those who have cried swearing to never ever withdraw from the Gnostic movement. And, however, it is painful to say it, everything has been in vain. Almost everyone fled. They became enemies, blaspheming, fornicating, committing adultery, and went on the black path. Really, these terrible contradictions of the human being are due to the human being having a fatal foundation and a tragic basis. Said foundation is the plurality of the I, the plurality of the loose cathexis which we all carry within. It is urgent to know that the I is a mass of psychic energies, loose cathexis, which reproduce in the lower animal depths of man. Each of these I's, these loose cathexis, struggle among themselves. I should read a newspaper, says the intellectual I. I will ride a bicycle, argues the motor I. I am hungry, declares the I of digestion. I am cold, says the I of metabolism. No one will impede me, exclaims the passionate I in defense of any of these loose cathexis. Conclusion: the I is a legion of loose cathexis. These loose cathexis have already been studied by Franz Hartmann. They live in the lower animal depths of man. They eat, sleep, reproduce, and live at the expense of our vital principles, or free cathexis, muscular and nervous kinetic energy. Each of the I's, which, in their mass, constitute the loose cathexis, the I, projects themselves in the different levels of the mind and travels longing for the satisfaction of its desires. The I, the ego, the loose cathexis, can never perfect itself. Man is the city of 9 gates. Within this city live many citizens which don't even know each other. Each of those citizens, each of those small I's, has its projects and its own mind. Those are the merchants which Jesus had to cast out of the temple with the whip of willpower. Those merchants should be killed. Now we will understand the reason for so many internal contradictions in the individual. As long as the loose cathexis exists, there can be no peace. The I's are the causa causorum of all the internal contradictions. The I which swears fidelity to Gnosis is replaced by another which hates it. Conclusion: man is an irresponsible being that does not have a permanent center of gravity. Man is a being that is not yet attained. Man is not yet a man. He is merely an intellectual animal. It is a very great error to call soul the legion of the I. Really and truly, man has within his essence the psychic material, the materia for the soul, but he does not yet have a soul. The Gospels say, "Of what use is it to win the world if you are going to lose your soul?" Jesus said to Nicodemus that it was necessary to be born by water and spirit in order to enjoy the attributes which correspond to a true soul. It is impossible to fabricate a soul if we do not undergo mystical death. It is only through the death of the I that we can establish a permanent center of consciousness within our own interior essence. Said center is that which is called soul. Only a man with a soul can have true continuity of purpose. It is only in a man with a soul that there are no internal contradictions and there is true inner peace. The I foolishly spends the psychic material, the cathexis, in explosions of anger, covetousness, lust, envy, pride, laziness, gluttony, etc. It is logical that as long as the psychic material, the cathexis, does not accumulate, the soul cannot be fabricated. In order to fabricate something, one needs the materia prima. Without the materia prima, nothing can be fabricated because from nothing, nothing can be obtained. When the I begins to die, the materia prima begins to accumulate. When the materia prima begins to accumulate, the establishment of a permanent center of consciousness is initiated. When the I has absolutely died, the center of permanent consciousness has remained totally established. The capital of psychic material accumulates when the ego dies, since the squanderer of energy is eliminated. In this manner, the permanent center of consciousness is established. Such marvelous center is the soul. Only the one who has established within himself the permanent center of consciousness can be faithful to Gnosis. Only he can have continuity of purpose. Those who do not possess such a center can be in Gnosis today and against it tomorrow. Today with one school, tomorrow with another school. This type of person does not have real existence. Mystical death is an arduous and difficult area of the revolution of the dialectic. The loose cathexis is dissolved on the basis of rigorous comprehension. Interaction with our fellow men, dealing with people, is the mirror where we can see ourselves at full length. In dealing with people, our hidden defects leap forward, they flourish, and if we are vigilant, we then see them. Every defect should first be intellectually analyzed and then studied with meditation. Money individuals attained perfect chastity in the physical world, but ended up being great fornicators and frightening sinners when they were subjected to the test in the superior worlds. They had put an end to their defects in the physical world, but in other levels of the mind, they continued with their loose cathexis. When a defect is totally comprehended in all the levels of the mind, its corresponding loose cathexis disintegrates. In other words, a small I dies. It is urgent to die from instant to instant. The soul is born with the death of the I. We need the death of the I in a total M in order for the plenitude of the bound cathexis, the being, to express himself. Negligence. Negligence and carelessness lead every human being to failure. To be negligent is, as we would say, nec legere, to not elect, to surrender to the arms of failure. Negligence is of the ego, and its opposite is intuition, which is of the being. The ego can neither elect nor distinguish, but the being can. It is only by means of the living incarnation of the revolution of the dialectic that we will learn to elect in order to not have any more failures in life. Transactions. 97% of human thoughts are negative and harmful. What we are here is the result of our own mental processes. Man should auto-explore his own mind if he wishes to identify himself, value himself, and auto-imagine himself correctly. The difficulty of profound introspective analysis lies in countertransference. This difficulty is eliminated through structural and transactional analysis. It is important to segregate and to dissolve certain undesirable psychic aggregates which are fixed in our mind in a traumatic manner. Transactional and structural analyses are intelligently combined in the matter of the exploration of the ego. Any psychic aggregate should be previously segregated before its final dissolution. The particular characteristic psychological trait. All human beings are 100% mechanical, unconscious beings working with their consciousness asleep without knowing where they come from or where they are going. They are profoundly hypnotized. The hypnosis, which is collective and flows in all of nature, is derived from the abominable Kundar Tigui Dor organ. This race is hypnotized, unconscious, submerged in the most profound sleep. Awakening is only possible by destroying the I, the ego. We have to recognize with entire clarity that sometimes we have talked about the particular characteristic psychological trait, PCPT, of each person. Certainly, each person has his particular characteristic psychological trait, that is true. Some will have lust as their characteristic trait, others will have hatred, for others it will be covetousness, etc. The trait is the sum of several particular characteristic psychological elements. For each PCPT, a definite event, a precise circumstance always exists. That a man is lustful, there will always be circumstances of lust in his life, accompanied with specific problems. These circumstances are always repeated. We need to know our PCPT if we want to move on to a superior level of the being and eliminate from ourselves the undesirable elements that constitute that PCPT. Otherwise, how will we move on to a superior level of the being? The intellectual animal becomes identified not only with external things, but he also goes around identified with himself, with his lustful thoughts, with his drunken sprees, with his anger, with his covetousness, with his self-importance, with vanity, with mystical pride, with self-merit, etc. Have we perhaps reflected that we have not only become identified with the exterior, but also with that which is vanity and pride? For example, did we triumph today? Did we triumph over the day, or did the day triumph over us? Are we certain that we did not become identified with a morbid, covetous, proud thought, with an insult, or a preoccupation, or debt, etc.? Are we certain that we triumphed over the day, or did the day triumph over us? What did we do today? Have we noticed the level of the being in which we are? Did we move on to a superior level of the being, or did we remain where we were? Can we perhaps believe that it is possible to move on to a superior level of the being if we do not eliminate specific psychological defects? Are we perhaps content with the level of the being in which we presently find ourselves? If we are going to remain our entire life in one level of the being, then what are we doing? In each level of the being exists specific bitterness, specific sufferings, that is obvious. Everyone complains that he suffers, that he has problems, of the state he is in, and of his struggles. Therefore, I ask one thing: does the intellectual animal concern himself with moving on to a superior level of the being? Obviously, as long as we are in the level of the being in which we are, all the adverse circumstances that we already know, and all the bitterness in which we are, will have to be repeated again. Over and over again, identical difficulties will surge. Do we want to change? Do we want to no longer have the problems that afflict us, the economic, political, social, spiritual, family, lustful, etc.? Do we want to avoid difficulties? We have no other solution but to move on to a superior level of the being. Each time that we take a step towards a superior level of the being, we become independent of the executing forces of the loose cathexis. Therefore, if we do not know our PCPT, we are doing very badly. We need to know it if we want to move on to a superior level of the being and eliminate from ourselves the undesirable elements that constitute that PCPT. Otherwise, how will we move on to a superior level of the being? The intellectual animal wants to stop suffering, but he does nothing to change. He does not struggle to move on to a superior level of the being. Therefore, how can he change? All phenomena are discontinuous. The dogma of evolution is useless, except for us to become stagnant. I know many pseudo-esoterists, sincere people and of good heart, who are bottled up in the dogma of evolution, who wait for time to perfect them, and millions of years elapse, and they never perfect themselves. Why? Because such persons do nothing to change the levels of the being. They always remain on the same rung. Therefore, we need to go beyond evolution and enter the revolutionary path, the path of the revolution of consciousness or of the dialectic. Evolution and involution are two laws which are simultaneously processed in all of creation. They constitute the mechanical axis of nature, but they will never lead us to liberation. The laws of evolution and involution are purely material and have nothing to do with the inner self-realization of the being. We do not deny them, they exist, but they are not good for psychological revolution. We need to be revolutionary. We need to enter the path of the revolution of consciousness. How could we move on to a superior level of the being if we were not revolutionary? Let us observe the different rungs of a ladder. They are discontinuous. Similarly, the different levels of the being are like that. To each level of the being belong a specific number of activities. When one moves to a superior level of the being, one has to take a leap and abandon all the activities one had in the inferior level of the being. To my memory come all those times of my life, 20, 30, 40 years ago, which were transcended. Why? Because I found superior levels of the being. It is what constituted for me the my importance. My activities of that era were suspended, cut off, because in the superior rungs of the being, there are other activities which are completely different. If one moves to a superior level of the being, one has to leave behind many things which are presently important to us, which belong to the level in which we are. The transition to another level of the being includes, therefore, a leap, and that leap is rebellious. It is never of an evolving type. It is always revolutionary, dialectic. There are men, busybodies, who feel they are like a god. This type of individuals are megalomaniacs of the worst kind, of the worst taste. The one who feels he is a sage because he has some pseudo-esoteric teachings in his mind and thinks that he is already a great initiate has fallen into megalomania. He is full of himself. Each of us is nothing but a vile worm of the mud of the earth. When I speak in this manner, I begin with myself. To be full of oneself, to have false images of oneself, fantasies of oneself, is to be in inferior levels of the being. One is identified with oneself thinking that one is going to have a lot of money, a beautiful latest model car, or that one's fiancé loves him, that one is a great man, or that one is a sage. There are many forms of becoming identified with oneself. One has to begin by not becoming identified with oneself, and then not becoming identified with things outside. When one, for example, does not become identified with an offender, one forgives him, loves him, the offender cannot hurt him. And if someone hurts one's self-esteem, but one does not become identified with self-esteem, it is therefore clear that one cannot feel any pain, since it does not hurt one. If we first of all become identified with ourselves and then with the vanities of the exterior world, then we cannot forgive. Let us remember the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. But I say something more. It is not enough simply to forgive, but we also have to cancel the debts. Someone could forgive an enemy, but would never ever cancel the debts. We have to be sincere. We need to cancel. The Lord's Gospel also says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." This is a phrase that no one has understood. Blessed are, we would say, the non-resentful. If one is resentful, how could one be meek? The resentful person lives keeping count. And I, who did him so many favors, I protected him, I did so many deeds of charity for him, and look at how this friend has paid me back when I have helped him so much, and now he is incapable of helping me. This is the accounting of the resentful. How could one be meek if one is full of resentments? The one who is full of resentments lives keeping count at all times. Therefore, he is not meek. How could he be blessed? What is understood by blessed? What is understood by happiness? Are we sure that we are happy? Who is happy? I have known persons who say, "I am happy, I am content with my life, I am joyful." But I have heard these same persons say, "So-and-so bothers me. I dislike that person. I don't know why I cannot get what I have always desired." Therefore, they are not happy. What really happens is that they are hypocrites, that's all. To be happy is very difficult. For that, one first of all needs to be meek. The word beatitude means inner happiness, not in 1,000 years, but now, right here, in the instant that we are living. If we truly become meek through non-identification, we will then get to be happy. But it is necessary not only to not become identified with our thoughts of lust, hatred, revenge, rancor, resentment, but also to eliminate from ourselves the red demons of Seth, those psychic aggregates which personify our defects of a psychological type. We have to comprehend, for example, what the process of resentment is. We have to dissect resentment. When one arrives at the conclusion that resentment is due to possessing self-esteem in our interior, we then struggle to eliminate the I of self-esteem. But we have to comprehend it in order to be able to eliminate it. We could not eliminate it if we have not previously comprehended it. In order to be able to eliminate, one needs Divi Kundalini Shakti. It is only she who can disintegrate any psychological defect, including the I of self-esteem. Are we sure that we are not resentful towards someone? Which of us is sure of not being resentful and of not keeping account? Who? If we want to become independent from lunar mechanics, we have to eliminate from ourselves the eye of resentment and of self-esteem. When one understands this, one advances on the path that leads to the final liberation. It is only by means of the fire of Aries, the Lamb, of the incarnate reign, of the inner Christ, that we can truly burn those inhuman elements which we carry in our interior. As consciousness comes unbottled, we will awaken. Consciousness cannot awaken as long as it continues bottled up within psychic aggregates which in their mass constitute myself, the I, the loose cathexis. We need to undergo mystical death here and now. We need to die from instant to instant. It is only with death that the novel arrives. If the germ does not die, the plant is not born. We need to learn to live, to liberate ourselves from that lunar heredity. Methodology of the work. Before knowing and eliminating the PCPT, we should work intensely in a general manner in relation to all the defects, since the PCPT has very profound roots which come from past existences. In order to know it, it is necessary to have worked in an untiring manner and with a methodology of work for at least 5 years. We must have order in the work and precision in the elimination of the defects. For example, during the day, the defects of lust in the morning, of pride in the afternoon, and anger at night have manifested themselves to one. Indubitably, we are seeing a succession of facts and manifestations. Therefore, we ask ourselves, how and on what defect that became manifested during the day should we work? Really and truly, the answer is simple. At nightfall, or at the hour of meditation, with the body relaxed, we move on to practice the retrospective exercise on the facts and manifestations of the loose cathexis of the myself, which have been put in order. We can work on them at night or during the hour of meditation, in a tranquil manner and with methodical order. In each work on this or that defect, event, and manifestation, enter the following factors: discovery, judgment, and execution. The 3 aforementioned factors are applied to each psychological defect in the following manner: discovery, when it has been seen in action, in manifestation; judgment or comprehension, when all its roots are known; execution, with the help of the Divine Mother Kundalini through the wise practice of sexual superdynamics. Sophisms of distraction. Sophisms are the false reasonings which induce us to err and which are gestated by the ego in the 49 levels of the subconscious. The subconscious is the sepulchre of the past upon which burns the fatuous flame of thought, and in which the sophisms of distraction are gestated. The latter lead the intellectual animal to fascination, and thereby to the sleep of consciousness. What is kept within the sepulchre is rottenness and bones of the dead. But the sepulchral stone is very beautiful, and on it fatally burns the flame of the intellect. If we want to dissolve the I, we have to uncover the subconscious sepulchre and exhume all the bones and rottenness of the past. The sepulchre is very beautiful outside, but within it is filthy and abominable. We need to become gravediggers. To insult another person, to hurt his intimate feelings, to humiliate him, is something that is very easy when it is done supposedly to correct him for his own good. This is how irate people think, those who, while believing that they do not hate, hate without knowing that they hate. Many are the people who struggle in life to be rich. They work, save, and strive for excellence in everything. But the secret trigger of all their activities is secret envy, which is ignored, which does not come out to the surface, which remains hidden in the sepulchre of the subconscious. It is difficult to find in life someone who does not envy the beautiful house, the brand new car, the intelligence of the leader, the beautiful suit, the magnificent fortune, etc. Almost always, the best efforts of citizens have as their secret trigger envy. Many are the persons who enjoy a good appetite and despise gluttony, but they always eat more than normal. Many are the people who watch their spouse in an exaggerated manner, but they despise jealousy. Many are the students of certain pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools who despise the things of this world and who do not work at all because everything is vanity, but they are jealous about their virtues and never accept anyone classifying them as lazy. Many are those who hate flattery and praise, but they have no inconvenience in humiliating with their modesty the poor poet who composed a verse for them with the only purpose of obtaining a coin to buy bread. Many are the judges who know how to fulfill their duty, but also many are the judges who with the virtue of duty have assassinated others. Numerous were the heads that fell at the guillotine of the French Revolution. No executioners feel guilty. They all fulfill their duty. Prisons are full of innocent people, but the judges do not feel guilty because they are fulfilling their duty. Full of anger, the father or mother whip and beat their small children, but they do not feel remorse because supposedly they are fulfilling their duty, and they would accept everything except being classified as cruel. It is only with a still and silent mind, submerged in deep meditation, that we will be able to extract from within the sepulchre of the subconscious all the secret rottenness which we carry within. It is nothing pleasant to see the dark sepulchre with all the bones and rottenness of the past. Each hidden defect smells awful inside its grave, but seeing it, it is easy to burn it and reduce it to ashes. The fire of comprehension reduces to dust the rottenness of the past. When they analyze the subconscious, many students of psychology commit the mistake of dividing themselves between analyzer and analyzed, intellect and subconscious, subject and object, perceiver and perceived. These types of divisions are the sophisms of distraction which the ego presents us. These types of divisions create antagonisms and struggles between the intellect and the subconscious. And where there are struggles and battles, there can be no stillness and silence of the mind. It is only in mental stillness and silence that we can extract from within the dark grave of the subconscious all the rottenness of the past. Let us not say, my I has envy, hatred, jealousy, anger, lust, etc. It is best not to divide ourselves. It is better to say, I have envy, hatred, jealousy, anger, lust, etc. When we study the sacred books of India, we become enthused thinking on the supreme Brahmatman and the union of Atman with Brahmatman. But really, as long as a psychological I, with its sophisms of distraction, exists, we will be unable to achieve the bliss of uniting ourselves with the universal spirit of life. Once the I is dead, the universal spirit of life is in us, like the flame in the lamp. The fallacy of the ego. The fallacy of the ego is the habit of deceiving without any limitation, the latter processing itself through the series of the I. Any person can commit the error of shooting his head, as is done by any cowardly and imbecile suicidal person, but the famous I of psychology will never be able to commit suicide. People of all pseudo-esoteric schools have magnificent ideals and even sublime intentions, but all of that continues existing in the field of subjective and miserable thinking. All of that is of the I. The I is always perverse. Sometimes it adorns itself with beautiful virtues and even wears the robe of sanctity. When the I wants to cease to exist, it does not do it in a disinterested and pure manner. It wants to continue in a different manner. It aspires to reward and happiness. During these mechanized times of life, there is production in series of cars, series of airplanes, series of machines of this or that brand, etc. Everything has become a series, and even the I itself is a series. We should know the series of the I. The I processes itself in series and more series of thoughts, sentiments, desires, hatreds, habits, etc. Let the dividers of the I continue dividing their ego between superior and inferior. Let them be with their theories and the touted superior and ultra-divine I, controlling the miserable inferior I. We know very well that that division between superior I and inferior I is 100% false. Superior and inferior are the two sections of Satan, the I. Can perhaps a part of the I reduce another part of the I to dust? Can perhaps one part of the myself decree the law of exile to another part of the myself? The most that we can do is to astutely conceal what is convenient to us, to hide our perversities and smile like saints. This is the fallacy of the ego, the habit of deceiving. One part of the myself can hide another part of the myself. Is this something unusual? Does perhaps the cat not hide his claws? This is the fallacy of the ego. We all carry the Pharisee within us. We are very beautiful from the outside, but we are very rotten within. We have known Pharisees who are horrifying. We knew one who wore the immaculate robe of the Master. His hair was long, and a razor never shaved his venerable beard. This man frightened the entire world with his sanctity. He was 100% vegetarian. He drank nothing that could have alcohol. People knelt before him. We do not mention the name of this chocolate saint. We only limit ourselves to say that he had abandoned his wife and children, supposedly to follow the path of sanctity. He preached beautiful things and spoke horrors against adultery and fornication. But in secrecy, he had many concubines and proposed anti-natural sexual connections through non-vessels to his female devotees. Yes, he was a saint, a chocolate saint. This is how Pharisees are. Woe unto thee, hypocritical scribes and Pharisees, for thou cleanest the cup and the plate from the outside, but from within thou art full of theft and injustice. You do not eat meat, you do not drink alcohol, you do not smoke. Truly you appear just before men, but you are full of hypocrisy and evil within. With his fallacy of the ego, the Pharisee conceals the crimes from the eyes of others, and also conceals them from himself. We know Pharisees who carry out tremendous fasts and frightening penitences. They are certain of being just and wise, but their victims suffer the unutterable. Almost always it is their wives and their children who are innocent victims of their evils, but they continue with their sacred exercises, convinced of being just and holy. The so-called superior I says, I will overcome anger, covetousness, lust, etc. But the so-called inferior I then laughs with the thunderous laughter of Aristophanes, and the demons of passions, terrified, flee to hide within the secret caverns of the different areas of the mind. This is how the fallacy of the ego functions. Every intellectual effort to dissolve the I is useless, because any movement of the mind belongs to the I. Any part of the myself can have good intentions, and so what? The path which leads to the abyss is paved with good intentions. That game or fallacy of one part of the myself which wants to control another part of the myself that has no desire to be controlled is interesting. Touching are the penitences of those saints who cause their wife and children to suffer. All those humilities of chocolate saints are funny. Admirable is the erudition of the know-it-alls. And so what? The eye cannot destroy the eye and continues perpetuating itself throughout millions of years in our descendants. We should break the spell of all those useless efforts and fallacies. When the eye wants to destroy the eye, effort is useless. It is only by truly comprehending in depth what the useless battles of the mind are. It is only by comprehending the internal and external actions and reactions, the secret responses, the hidden motives, the concealed impulses, etc., that we can then attain the imposing stillness and silence of the mind. Upon the pure waters of the ocean of the universal mind, we can contemplate in a state of ecstasy all the devilities of the pluralized I. When the eye can no longer hide, it is condemned to death. The eye likes to hide, but when it can no longer hide, the wretched one is lost. It is only in the serenity of the mind that we see the eye just as it is, and not as it apparently is. To see the eye and comprehend it becomes an integral whole. The eye has failed after we have comprehended it, because it inevitably becomes dust. The stillness of the ocean of the mind is not a result, it is a natural state. The swollen waves of thoughts are only an accident produced by the monster of the eye. The fatuous mind, the stubborn mind, the mind that says, "With time I will achieve serenity, one day I will get there," is condemned to failure because the serenity of the mind does not belong to time. Everything that belongs to time is of the eye. The eye itself is of time. Those who want to assemble the serenity of the mind, to assemble it like someone who assembles a machine by intelligently joining all of its parts, are in fact failures, because the serenity of the mind is not constituted by several parts which can be assembled or disassembled, organized or disorganized, joined or separated. Effort. In order to experience the truth, one does not need any effort whatsoever. People are accustomed to exerting effort in everything and erroneously suppose that it is impossible to experience the truth without any effort. We may need effort to earn our daily bread, or to play a game of football, or to carry a very heavy load. But it is absurd to believe that effort is necessary in order to experience that which is the truth. Comprehension replaces effort when one tries to comprehend the truth intimately hidden in the secret depth of each problem. We do not need any effort to comprehend each and all of the defects that we carry hidden in the different levels of the mind. We do not need effort to comprehend that envy is one of the most powerful triggers of the social machinery. Why do many people want to progress? Why do many people want to have beautiful residences and very elegant cars? The entire world envies what belongs to others. Envy is regret for others' well-being. Elegant women are envied by other less elegant women, and this serves to intensify struggle and pain. Those who do not have, want to have, and will not even eat in order to buy clothes and adornments of all types, with the only objective of not being less than anyone. Every paladin of a great cause is mortally hated by the envious. The envy of the impotent, of the vanquished, of the mean person is disguised with the judge's toga, or with the robe of sanctity and of mastery, or with the sophism of applause, or with the beauty of humility. If we comprehend in an integral manner that we are envious, it is logical that envy then ends, and in its place appears the star that rejoices and shines for others' well-being. There are persons who want to cease being covetous, but who covet not being covetous. There you have a form of covetousness. There are men who exert themselves in order to attain the virtue of chastity, but when they see a beautiful woman on the street, they pay her some beautiful compliments, and if the woman is a friend, they can do nothing less than ply her with attentions, tell her beautiful words, admire her, praise her beautiful qualities, etc. The secret intentions behind all that coquetry is found in the secret trigger of subconscious, tenebrous, and submerged lust. When we comprehend without any effort whatsoever all the tricks of lust, the latter is annihilated, and in its place is born the immaculate flower of chastity. It is not with any effort that we can acquire those virtues. The eye is fortified when it exerts itself to acquire virtues. The eye loves decorations, medals, titles, honors, virtues, beautiful qualities, etc. Greek traditions narrate that Aristippus, the philosopher, wanting to demonstrate his wisdom and modesty, put on an old robe full of patches and holes, clutched the staff of philosophy, and walked on the streets of Athens. When Socrates saw him arrive at his house, he exclaimed, "O Aristippus, your vanity shows through the holes of your clothes." The pedantic, the vain, the proud, believing themselves very humble, wear the robe of Aristippus. Humility is a very exotic flower. Whoever boasts of humility is full of pride. In practical life, we make many useless efforts each time that a new problem torments us. We appeal to efforts to solve it. We struggle and suffer. But then the only thing that we obtain is to commit inanities and to complicate existence more and more. The disillusioned, the disenchanted, those who no longer even want to think, those who are not able to solve a vital problem, find the solution when their mind is serene and tranquil, when they had no hope whatsoever. No truth can be comprehended means of effort. The truth comes to us by means of profound comprehension. We need effort to work in the great work, effort to transmute our creative energies, effort to live, struggle, and tread the path of integral revolution. But we do not need effort to comprehend the truth. Psychological slavery. There is not the least doubt that we are on the verge of a third world conflagration, and that is why we have written this book titled The Revolution of the Dialectic. Times have changed, and we are initiating a new era within the august thundering of thought. A new revolutionary ethics based on a revolutionary psychology is now needed. Without an in-depth ethics, the best social and economic formulae remain reduced to dust. It is impossible for the individual to transform himself if he does not concern himself with the dissolution of the I. Psychological slavery destroys interaction. Psychological dependence on someone is slavery. If our manner of thinking, feeling, and acting depends on the manner of thinking, feeling, and acting of those persons who interact with us, then we are enslaved. We constantly receive letters from many people who are desirous of eliminating the I, but they complain about the wife, children, brother, family, husband, boss, etc. Those people demand conditions in order to dissolve the I. They want luxuries in order to annihilate the ego. They demand magnificent conduct from those with whom they interact. The funniest thing of all of this is that those poor people seek different subterfuges. They want to flee, abandon their home, their job, etc., supposedly to realize themselves in depth. Poor people. Their adored torments are their bosses, naturally. These people have not yet learned to be free. Their conduct depends on the conduct of others. If we want to follow the path of chastity and aspire that our wife first be chaste, then we are failures already. If we want to cease being drunkards, but we become embarrassed when we are offered a drink because of what others will say, or because our friends could become angry, then we will never cease to be drunkards. If we want to cease being angry, irascible, irate, furious, but as a prior condition we demand that those who interact with us be sweet and serene, and that they do nothing that bothers us, then yes, we are failures, because they are not saints, and at any moment they will put an end to our good intentions. If we want to dissolve the I, we need to be free. The one who depends on the behavior of others will not be able to dissolve the I. Our conduct should be our own and should not depend on anyone. Our thoughts, feelings, and actions should flow independently from the inside towards the outside. The worst difficulties offer us the best opportunities. In the past, there existed many sages surrounded by all types of luxuries and without difficulties of any type. Those sages, wanting to annihilate the I, had to create difficult situations for themselves. In difficult situations, we have formidable opportunities to study our internal and external impulses, our thoughts, sentiments, actions, our reactions, volitions. Interaction is a full-length mirror where we can see ourselves as we are and not as we apparently are. Interaction is a marvel. If we are properly attentive, we can discover at each instant our most secret defects. They flourish, leap out when we least expect it. We have known many people who say, "I no longer have anger," and at the least provocation, they thunder and flash like lightning. Others say, "I no longer have jealousy," but one smile of the spouse to any good neighbor is enough for their faces to be green with jealousy. People protest because of the difficulties that interaction offers them. They do not want to realize that those difficulties are providing them precisely the necessary opportunities to the dissolution of the I. Interaction is a formidable school. The book of that school is the I. We need to be really free if we really want to dissolve the I. The one who depends on the behavior of others is not free. Only the one who becomes truly free knows what true love is. The slave does not know what true love is. The woman who fears her husband believes that she adores him, when truly what is happening is that she fears him. She may fear that she may leave with someone else, or that her character may become sour, or that she may deny him sexually, etc. The employee who fears the boss believes that he loves him, that he respects him, that he cares for his interests, etc. No, psychological slavery is incompatible with love. There are two types of conduct. The first is the one that comes from the outside to the inside, and the second is the one that goes from the inside to the outside. The first is the result of psychological slavery and is produced by reaction. We are hit and we hit back. We are insulted and we reply with insults. The second type of conduct is the best, that of one who is no longer a slave, that of one who has nothing to do with the thinking, feeling, and doing of the others. That type of conduct is independent. It is upright and just conduct. If we are hit, we answer with blessings. If we are insulted, we keep silent. If they want to get us drunk, we do not drink, even when our friends become angry, etc. Now our readers will comprehend why psychological freedom brings that which is called love.
The Chalkean personality. We have to become more and more conscious each time of the work that we are carrying out. It is fundamental to know the difference that exists between the Gnostic movement and all the other pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist organizations that there are. Above all else, we have to know how to situate ourselves, how to center ourselves if we want to comprehend the work that we should carry out. If we take a general look at the different schools which presently exist in the world, all of a pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist nature, we easily get to discover their origin. On one occasion, there occurred in Rome the case of a nun who constantly fell into a hypnotic trance. She had a confessor, and with him she had to clarify the causa causorum of those fatal trances. Before all else, the confessor managed to know that she had had a lover, and that although she was cloistered, she kept a photograph of her lover. The confessor made her bring it, and suddenly he realized that by merely looking at that picture, she fell into a trance. That confessor resolved to be assessed by a psychologist, and they subjected the nun to psychic experiments. They were then able to evince that it was not the photograph of that man which put her in a hypnotic state, but rather some very brilliant stones which were on the picture frame. The investigations continued, and very soon it was possible to conclude, as a consequence or corollary, that all types of brilliant objects predispose to hypnotic states. As a result, practically an entire school was derived. They were able to verify that by means of hypnotic states, it would be possible to modify in some way the psychological states of patients, and it was thereby resolved to utilize hypnosis to cure patients or sick persons. This is how the famous medical hypnotists were born. It was then that many followers of hypnology, catalepsy, mediumship, etc., made their appearance in the world. It is not superfluous to remember Richard Charcot, Luis Uribe, Cesar Lombroso, Camille Flammarion, etc., with certain emphasis. In that school of hypnotists, the ones who especially stood out were an Englishman whose name I do not recall in these precise instants, and a famous Charcot. As far as the former is concerned, he had all the properties of a Hanasmasian. The latter, referring to Charcot, there was no doubt that he was mommy's baby. His experiments were noteworthy, but since he was the baby, the spoiled child of the family, everything that he did was a marvel. Well, if I mention all of these passages in a general manner, and experiments of magnetism, hypnology, catalepsy, spiritism, and 50,000 things of the sort, it is with a single purpose, to make you see where the different schools of a pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist type of this dark age of Kali Yuga came from. In those times of the young ladies Fox de Mirville, who managed to serve as instruments for the materialization of the famous Katie King, a phantom that lasted 3 consecutive years materializing herself before the eyes of different scientists of the entire world. In those days of Eusapia Palladino of Naples, in which all of Europe became agitated with psychic phenomena, this is when theosophism of an Oriental type appeared. And of course, you know it. Everyone who has visited those organizations knows that in the aforementioned school there is always a mixture of spiritism with theories of a Hindu type. Theosophism has never been free of the spiritualistic phenomenon. When we know the origin of the different organizations which presently exist, it cannot surprise us in any way that theosophism is mixed with some mediuinship. That theosophists become frightened before tantrism is normal because it is not a school of an esoteric type, but rather of a pseudo-occultist type and nothing more. Unquestionably, many branches or organizations, let us call them pseudo-Rosicrucianism, pseudo-yogism, etc., had to branch off, and they did so, as is natural, from that school of hypnotists. They are so innumerable that we would need to consult a dictionary to know all their names. But let us get to the bottom of this matter. What is the foundation of such schools? The dogma of evolution. Where did such touted dogma come from? From a Mr. Darwin. It seems incredible that Mr. Darwin has put into his pocket many eminent figures, many esoterist, pseudo-esoterist investigators, and many sincere aspirants. But that is how it happened. We cannot deny it. The concept about reincarnation, which was created by pseudo-esoteric organizations in the Western world, is false. Lord Krishna never said that all human beings reincarnated. He said that only the Buddhas, the gods, the solar heroes had the right to reincarnation. The rest of us are subjected to the law of the eternal return of all things. That is clear.
It was also never said in the Orient that all humanoid beings possessed the superior existential bodies of the being. But it was easy for the schools of a pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist type to make humanity believe that the entire world already possesses such superior vehicles. In this manner, they have no inconvenience in talking about the subject, the septenary of man, with such certainty that it seems as if all humanoids truly possessed that entire set of vehicles. Well, the result of this species of morbidity, disseminated throughout the Western world from these schools of a subjective, incoherent, vague, and indefinite type, has been the Kalkian personality. In other words, the personality that is characteristic of this age of Kali Yuga. Kalkian personalities are disrespectful, irreverent. This type of personality from pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools have lost not only the sense of authentic devotion and of true religiosity, but also that of veneration for the ancient patriarchs. In this manner, humanity, having been able to be directed by truly wise religions, has degenerated in its ridiculous pedantry, thus forming the Kalkian personality. It is convenient to know how to confront a Kalkian personality with an authentically esoterist personality. What is the difference? The Kalkian personality is full of pedantries, bottled up in the dogma of evolution, misinformed about the internal constitution of man. He ignorance the tantric mysteries. He fears the development of the igneous serpent in the spinal column, and besides, the fact of being stuffed with theories produces in him a feeling of self-sufficiency. Unquestionably, the Kalkian personality is a victim of self-deceit. He believes that he has achieved everything when he has achieved nothing. And what is worse is that he has lost the sense of veneration. He has forgotten the true and authentic religiosity. He has also lost humility before the creating Logos. This is the Kalkian personality. We cannot walk on the path of the Kalkian personality. We cannot accept those false dogmas such as evolution, such as that of believing that all humanoids are perfect, complete men with their existential bodies, such as fearing the igneous serpent of our magical powers and the lived experience, etc. We prefer instead to follow the path of authentic wisdom, the path of the tantras, that of the dissolution of our ego, and that of the recognition of our own misery and incapacity. We prefer to recognize that we are nothing, that we are only miserable worms in the mud. We are concerned, yes, to work in ourselves, upon ourselves. We use the intelligent power of the creative energy. We work in the forge of the Cyclops, which frightens pseudo-esoterists and pseudo-occultists so much. We are therefore on a different, 100% revolutionary path, and which nonetheless has a frightening antiquity which is lost in the unbearable night of all ages. Certainly, the characteristics of the Kalkian personality are unmistakable. Before everything else, the self-sufficiency and the terrible pride and the frightening vanity based on theories. We see, for example, in the schools of psychoanalysis, parapsychology, etc., what terrible pride and self-sufficiency seize those people with true Kalkian personalities. They stand out not only in certain groups, but they also appear on television, they appear in the press, on radio, and have the entire world completely poisoned with a type of vibrations which in esotericism is called venenioskyrian. They have complete self-sufficiency. They look at the people of the Middle Ages with disdain. They think that they are super-civilized. They believe that they have arrived at the non plus ultra of wisdom. Such is their pride that they plan to conquer the infinite outer space. They laugh at what they consider to be superstitions of the medieval sages. There you have the subject with a Kalkian personality. And how does one make those Kalkian personalities comprehend that they are mistaken? It would not be sufficient to simply tell them, for they will deny it, isn't that true? Since those Kalkian personalities have mastery over reasoning, and that is their combat weapon, their little battle horse, well, we have to lead them to comprehend what the reasoning process is. We have to make those self-sufficient and proud people know that Immanuel Kant, the philosopher of Königsberg, the great German thinker, wrote a book called The Critic of Pure Reason, as well as The Critic of Practical Reason.
If we study Immanuel Kant, we will see how he deciphers us not only in his prosyllogisms, episyllogisms, and syllogisms, but also in the matter how he analyzes the concepts of contents in the Critic of Pure Reason. It is clear that through external sensory perceptions we inform the mind, then the latter elaborates its concepts of contents based precisely on the rustic sensory connections, and because of that is circumscribed only by the data provided by the senses. Therefore, what can the subjective reason know about intuitions, and about ideas a priori, and about that which escapes the concepts of contents based only on external sensory perceptions? Nothing, isn't that true?
There exists another type of reason, which the Kalkian personality absolutely ignores. I wish to emphatically refer to objective reason. Obviously, the latter has as its foundation the data of the conscience, and it is with such data with which it functions. In authentic esotericism, the conscience is called Zustat. Objective reason was developed before the Greco-Roman period emerged. The primitive Aryans of the first subrace of the great Aryan race, which flourished in Central Asia, had it developed. The people of the second subrace, prior to the period of the solar rishis, possessed it. The Egyptians of the ancient dynasties of the pharaohs, the Babylonians, the sages of Afghanistan, Turkestan, and Iraq also used it and concluded practically with Greek reasoning. The Greeks were the ones who, beginning to play with words, ended up by establishing the subjective reason based on external sensory perceptions, drowning the objective reason, eliminating it from the face of the earth. Ever since then, humanity only possesses the subjective reason, external sensory perceptions, the data provided by the senses. The concepts of contents are based on the sensorial connections, etc., and subjective reason can know nothing about that which escapes the aforementioned factors. The sensualistic subjective reason can know nothing about that which is real, the divine, about the mysteries of life and death, etc. It is completely ignorant of all that which escapes its sphere of action, the five deficient senses. Unquestionably, the powers of the heart exist, those qualities which are much beyond the intellect and its purely reasoning process, and which the sensorialistic subjective reason knows nothing of. In the sacred land of the Vedas, there is an old manuscript which says the following: "The one who meditates on the heart center will achieve control over the Vayu Tattva, the etheric principle of air, and will also acquire the Siddhis, the powers of the saints." In these moments, there comes to my memory the case of Joseph of Cupertino. They say that he elevated himself into the air 70 times, and this magical occurrence, which happened around 1650, was the reason why he was canonized. It is indubitable that he had the heart center developed. When a cardinal interrogated him, he told him, "Well, why is it that you clamor at the moment that you are going to rise while in prayer?" He then answered, "The gunpowder, when ignited in the harquebus, explodes with a great noise. The same thing occurs to the heart, which is inflamed by divine love." So, in a practical manner, Joseph of Cupertino gave the clue of the jinn state. The heart is what we have to develop in order to be able to achieve the jinn states. Christina, the extraordinary saint, constantly levitated. Once dead, it was believed that she was dead. They were going to bury her, and suddenly, from within the coffin, she arose, floating all the way to the bell tower of the church. We could continue narrating innumerable cases, surely that of Francis of Assisi. The good brother who took care of him brought him food, and the monk was already in levitation, floating in the atmosphere.
On other occasions, the good brother could not manage to give him the food because he could not reach him. Francis of Assisi was already too high, to such a degree that sometimes he would disappear into a grove nearby. Poor Mesmer! He was ridiculed very much in his time, and they continue ridiculing him in the present. Criticism was raised against him, and they still continue criticizing him in the present. Many texts of hypnotism begin by talking against Mesmer. Hypnotists hate him because he precisely pronounced himself against that false conscience. He discovered that a double conscience existed, the false and the true conscience. Mesmer came to unmask the false conscience before the solemn verdict of public opinion, and it is clear that they almost swallowed him. That is the crude reality of facts. Well, in order to not divert so much from the subject, what I want to say is that inner development is only achieved by endeavoring to throw the false conscience into the trash and pay attention to the true conscience, the authentic conscience. What is understood by false conscience? That which they have formed for us from the time we were born, that which was created with the examples, with the precepts of all of our relatives, that which was created in school, in secondary school, etc., that which was formed with all the social prejudices that exist and shall exist. We have to throw all of that into the bottom of the trash and cause the true conscience to come to the surface in order to work. This indicates that one must become a child in order to work, to become an infant, a baby at the moment of working, stripped of theories and putting the true wisdom into play. In this manner, therefore, I have written this chapter with the purpose that we may center ourselves, that we recognize the situation in which we are in this world, that we understand that we do not march on the path of all the little schools, sects, and orders that form the Colchian personality, that we are different, that is all. Contumacy. Contumacy is the insistence of pointing out an error. And that is why I will never become tired of insisting that the cause of all errors is the ego, the myself. I do not care if the intellectual animals become upset because I speak against the ego. No matter what, I will continue with contumacy. 2 great world wars have passed, and the world is on the verge of a 3rd world war. The world is in crisis. There is misery, illnesses, and ignorance everywhere. The 2 world wars have not left us anything good. The First World War left us the terrible influenza, which killed millions of persons in the year 1918. The Second World War left us a mental pest, which is worse than the pest of the First World War. We are referring to the abominable existentialist philosophy, which has totally poisoned the new generations and against which the revolution of the dialectic proclaims itself. All of us have created this social chaos in which we live, and all of us together should work to dissolve it and make a better world by means of the teachings which I deliver in this work. Unfortunately, people only think of their egotistical I and say, I am first, I am second, and I am third. We have already said it, and we repeat it once more. The I, the myself, sabotages the orders which revolutionary psychology establishes. If we truly and very sincerely want the revolution of the dialectic, we first need the radical transformation of the individual. Many are the persons who accept the need for a radical, total, and definitive interior change, but unfortunately, they demand stimuli and special incentives. People like to hear that they are doing well, that they be given pats on the shoulder, that they be told stimulating words, etc. Many are the persons who demand some beautiful verse that will serve them as an inducement to change, some belief, some ideology, or any utopia in order to change. There are those who demand the promise of a good job as an inducement to change. There are those who demand a good courtship or a magnificent marriage that will serve them as an inducement to change. Nobody wants to change just like that, but they do want a good incentive for action. People enjoy stimuli. Poor people do not want to comprehend that such stimuli are empty and superficial, and that therefore it is but logical that they are useless. Stimuli have never in life, never in the history of the centuries, been able to provoke a radical, total, and definitive radical change within any individual. Within every person exists an energetic center that cannot be destroyed with the death of the physical body and perpetuates itself for the misfortune of the world in our descendants. That center is the I, the myself, the oneself. We need with maximum undelayable urgency to produce a radical change within that energetic center called the I. Pats on the shoulder, beautiful words, beautiful flattery, beautiful stimuli, noble inducements, etc., will never be able to produce any radical change in that energetic center called the I, which is within ourselves. If we sincerely and wholeheartedly want a radical change within that center called the I, we have to recognize our lamentable state of misery and interior poverty and forget ourselves in order to work disinterestedly for humanity. This means abnegation, complete forgetting of oneself, and complete abandonment of oneself. It is impossible for there to be a radical change within ourselves if we only think of filling our pockets with money and more money. The I, the myself, wants to grow, improve, evolve, interact with the great people on earth, to acquire influence, position, wealth, etc. Superficial changes in our person are useless. They do not change anything and do not transform anyone or anything. We need a profound change within each of us. Such change can only be carried out within the center that we carry within. Within the I, like a potter's cup, we need to break the egotistical center. It is urgent to extirpate the I in order to produce a profound, radical, total, and definitive change within each of us. In the state that we are in, we can only serve to make our lives bitter and to make our fellow men's lives bitter. The I wants to fill itself with honors, virtues, money, etc. The I wants pleasures, fame, prestige, etc. And in its crazy eagerness to extend itself, it creates an egotistical society in which there are only disputes, cruelties, insatiable covetousness, limitless and borderless ambition, wars. To our misfortune, we are members of a society created by the I. Such a society is useless, harmful, and deleterious. It is only by radically extirpating the I that we can integrally change and change the world. If we truly want the radical extirpation of the I, it is urgent to have the memory still, for the mind to become serene, and then observe ourselves calmly in order to know ourselves. We should contemplate ourselves like someone who is contemplating and enduring on himself a torrential rain. No one in life can dissolve the I by seeking substitutes, leaving liquor behind and replacing it with the cigarette, abandoning a woman to marry another, leaving a defect to replace it with another, or leaving a school for another school. If we truly want a radical change within ourselves, we should set aside all those things that appear positive to us, all those old habits, and all those mistaken customs. The mind is the central headquarters of the I. We need a change in the central headquarters for there to be true revolution within each of us. It is only with absolute abnegation and comprehension of what we unfortunately are, and without stimuli or incentives of any type, that we truly achieve the extirpation of the I.
The states of the ego. The states of the ego are classified in the following manner. Stereopsychic are the identifying states which are intimately related with the exterior perceptions which are received through the five senses and which are connected with the world of impressions. Neopsychic are the data processing states, in other words, those which properly interpret or misinterpret all the multiple situations which the intellectual animal lives. Our bad secretary, the personality, works in these states. Archaeopsychic are the regressive states, memory of the ego, which are found in the 49 levels of the subconscious. They are the memories of the past, which are filed in a photographic and phonographic manner. Blue time, or rest therapeutics. On the mysterious threshold of the Temple of Delphi, there was a Greek maxim inscribed on living stone which read, "Nose te ipsum." Man, know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods. It is obvious that in the last instant, the study of oneself, serene reflection, concludes in the stillness and silence of the mind. When the mind is still and in silence, not only on a superficial intellectual level, but also in each and all of the 49 subconscious departments, then comes the novel, the essence, the consciousness becomes unbottled, and the awakening of the soul, ecstasy, and samadhi come. The daily practice of meditation radically transforms us. People who do not work on the annihilation of the I live like butterflies going from school to school and do not find their permanent center of gravity. They die as failures without having attained the inner self-realization of the being. The awakening of consciousness is only possible through liberation and emancipation from mental dualism, from the battle of the antitheses, from intellectual waves. Any subconscious, infraconscious, or unconscious struggle becomes an impediment to the liberation of the essence. Every antithetical battle, no matter how insignificant or unconscious it might be, indicates unknown obscure points in the atomic infernos of man. In order to achieve the absolute stillness and silence of the mind, it is indispensable to observe and to know those infrahuman aspects of oneself. It is only in the absence of the I that it is possible to experience and live the integral revolution and the revolution of the dialectic. Blue time, or rest therapeutics, has basic rules without which it would be impossible to emancipate ourselves from the mortifying shackles of the mind. These rules are: 1. Relaxation. It is indispensable to learn to relax the body for meditation. No muscle should remain in tension. It is urgent to provoke and graduate sleepiness at will. It is evident that the wise combination of sleepiness and meditation results in that which is called illumination. 2. Retrospection. What are we looking for in retrospection? Due to the mechanical life that he lives in, the intellectual animal forgets himself and falls into fascination. He goes around with an asleep consciousness, without remembering what he did at the moment of rising, without knowing the first thoughts of the day, his actions, and the places he has been to. Retrospection has as objective the acquisition of awareness of one's behavior or actions of the past. On carrying out the retrospection, we will not put in any objections to the mind. We will recall memories of past actions from the moment of beginning the retrospection to the moment of our lives that we desire. We should study each memory without becoming identified with it. 3. Serene reflection. First, we need to become fully aware of the mood that we are in before any thought surges. Serenely observe our mind. Pay full attention to any mental form that appears on the screen of the intellect. It is necessary to become sentries of our own mind during any agitated activity and to stop for an instant to observe it. 4. Psychoanalysis. Investigate, inquire, find out the origin of each thought, memory, affection, emotion, sentiment, resentment, etc., as they surge in the mind. During psychoanalysis, one should examine, evaluate, and inquire about the origin, cause, reason, or fundamental motive of each thought, memory, image, and association as they surge from the bottom of the subconscious. 5. Mantralization or koan. The objectives of this phase are A. To mix the magical forces of mantrams or koans in our inner universe. B. To awaken the consciousness. C. To accumulate Christi atoms of high voltage within. In this psychological work, the intellect should take upon itself a receptive, integral, unitotal, full, tranquil, and profound state. One achieves the unitotal receptive state with the koans or phrases that decontrol the mind. 6. Superlative analysis. Consists of an introspective knowledge of oneself. During deep meditation, introversion is indispensable. In that state, one will work in the process of the comprehension of the I, or defect, that one wants to disintegrate. The Gnostic student will concentrate himself on the psychological aggregate and will maintain it on the screen of the mind. Above all, it is indispensable to be sincere with oneself. Superlative analysis consists of two phases, which are A. Self-exploration. To investigate, in the depth of our consciousness and in the 49 subconscious departments, when was the defect first manifested in our lives? When it last manifested itself, and in what moments is it that it has more strength to manifest itself? B. Self-discovery. To investigate what the foods of the I are. To fraction and divide the defect in various parts, and to study each part to get to know the kind of I it originates from, and the kind of I that originate from it. C. Self-judgment. To seat the defect being studied on the defendant's bench, to bring to judgment the damages it causes to the consciousness, and the benefits that the annihilation of the defect being judged would bring into our life. 8. Prayer. One will ask the Divine Mother Kundalini, our inner and individual mother, with much fervor. One will talk to her with frankness and introverting all the defects and faults we have so that she, who is the only one capable of disintegrating the eyes, will disintegrate them from their very root. It is pleasant and interesting to attend the meditation halls, Gnostic sanctuaries, every time one is able to do so. It is essential to always practice meditation with closed eyes so as to avoid external sensory perceptions. The corpses of the ego. In the atomic infernos, one has to disintegrate the corpses of the ego by dint of the sexual electric force. One must not wait for time to disintegrate them. The precious diamond with which Solomon polished the precious stones is the philosopher's stone. Upon disintegrating the corpses of the ego, we should direct all of our efforts to not creating physical bodies once again because they are vulnerable and exposed to aging and death. Indubitably, karma creates bodies. Due to the lack of psychological work, people of today are not profound and they like being superficial. They believe themselves capable of laughing at all civilizations. Presently, the human mind is degenerated due to the matter of concepts. Every concept that is emitted is the result of what others have said, of what has been studied. Self-concept is based on the experience of one's own form of thinking. Gurdjieff is incipient in his teachings. Krishnamurti does have self-concepts because he has never read anything from anyone. Imbalance and rupture with the harmony of the cosmos occurs when self-authority is not possessed within. How will one possess self-authority if one is not lord of oneself? Self-action can only be possible when one has the being within. The philosopher's stone, self-concept, self-action, and self-authority are only possible when one disintegrates the corpses of the ego in the psychological atomic infernos. Psychogenesis. Our civilization, apparently so brilliant due to the conquest of space and the penetration of matter, is rotten due to the leprosy of a decadent ethics of homosexuality, lesbianism, and drug addiction. This civilization has entered the phase of involution to liquidate itself, as has occurred with other civilizations. The historical testimony of the proud and imperial Rome, where the signs of involution surged forth when the greatness of an austere and moral nation suffered radical changes which sunk it into vices, having been a conquering community of the old world, shows it to us. On what do I base myself? On clear and conclusive facts. A great culture such as that of the English now only exports a psychological leprosy which contaminates the generations of these times. The English group, the punk rock, who are capable of doing everything that is contrary to what is established, but negatively to appear as outstanding figures, are the creators of punk rock and fabricators of songs which are plagued with bad words, themes which they employ for direct attack not only against institutions, but also against the public itself that listens with an asleep consciousness. Filth is the flag of the Sex Pistols, a subjective message which they deliver to this poor humanity which is rotten to the core. The Sex Pistols is an aggressive group. It commits abuses against everything that is pointed out by the punk rock religion. Songs against love, full of cynicism, against repression and aggression, created by 4 young people of the English working class who are against elitism. It is absurd for these intellectual animals to be able to create a religion, forgetting that the word religion comes from the Greek religare, which means union with the divinity. But what type of divinity do these degenerate people have which young people adore in their hypnosis as if it was something great? That musical current shown by the Sex Pistols creates the most infernal atmosphere in present existence. This is confirmed by hundreds of young people sunk in the most profound spiritual and psychological ignorance who participate in those auditions of the 100 Club in London. The punk wave advances in spite of opposition, and the subjective fashion already appears in innumerable international magazines. Clothes cut into strips, discarded pieces of any existent materials that they employ as adornment, short hair dyed with many colors, shirts and t-shirts with legends against everything. This is a clear demonstration of the symptoms of the psychological leprosy which humanity has and which has it so rotten. In many of their encounters, physical aggressiveness, anger, is a habit. With enormous ease, insults are uttered, and even bottles are flung from the very stage of the Sex Pistols, which often leads to brawls, and from there this even leads to jail and even the hospitals. With all of this insulting verbiage and flinging of objects, appear hundreds of English young people yelling that they love the Sex Pistols because they're the maximum, as it has already occurred in some auditions of the Paradise Club on Brewer Street. Curiously, the Sex Pistols band is led by Johnny Rotten, the leader who never sung before, Sid Vicious, Paul Cook, and Steve Jones. They do not respect anyone in England, and it would be very difficult for them to come to our country. I consider that life could not be explained without periodic evolutions and involutions, such as that of the punk wave, which is noticed in plants, animals, human beings, in stars, and in constellations. Historical cycles also have an evolution and then the involution, which fatally presents itself, which wears out rocks, pulverizes suns, transforms someone who was once a boy into an old man, converts the tree into coal, and sinks continents into the depth of the oceans, or causes them to emerge. Our postulates presented in this work seek to establish the foundations of a new civilization which will not have leprosy and will base itself on psychogenesis, in other words, on the creation of man first of all, to then move on to the superman through the mental and sexual superdynamics which we have been emphasizing in this book. All those who wish to can enter our Gnostic institutions which disseminate my teachings, as long as they have aspirations to improve and to carry out the psychogenesis in themselves here and now. The man who has not carried out the psychogenesis in himself only uses an infinitesimally small part of his capacities and potential. That is why I invite our readers to practice the psychological teachings I deliver in these chapters in order for them to learn to obtain the maximum yield from their psyche. Within every human being exist infinite possibilities for a knowledge which is also limitless. We all possess in embryonic stage great psychological faculties which will surge forth at every moment that we initiate the work of carrying out a psychogenesis in ourselves without waiting one more instant. The human being should prepare himself to know everything that concerns his existence. This is a fact that is as natural as free will. Why are we here? Where did we come from? Where are we going? All of this should be known here and remain free of dogmas and theories. By means of the psychological disciplines that I have been indicating, we will be able to improve psychically, in other words, to carry out the psychogenesis in ourselves in order to place ourselves in contact with the different dimensions of nature. As we work on our psychogenesis, we will be seeing our own individual improvement, thus having access to the profound esoteric teachings which throughout the course of the countless centuries have been there at the disposal of every human being who sincerely yearns to find an answer to a number of voids and questions, and which without knowing it answer the immortal suggestion of the great Master, "Seek and ye shall find." In synthesis, we will say that psychogenesis is based on the phrase of the ancient temple of Delphi, "I warn you, whoever you are, O you who wish to probe the arcanes of nature, if you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither shall you be able to find it outside. If you ignore the excellencies of your own house, how do you intend to find other excellencies? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. O man, know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods." The transformation of impressions. We are going to talk about the transformation of life, and this is possible if one profoundly resolves it unto oneself. Transformation means that one thing changes into another different thing. It is logical that everything is susceptible to changes. Transformations exist which are well known in matter. No one could deny, for example, that sugar is transformed into alcohol and that the latter is converted into vinegar by means of the action of fermentation. This is the transformation of a molecular substance. One knows about the chemical life of the elements. For example, radium is slowly transformed into lead. The alchemists of the Middle Ages spoke about the transmutation of lead into gold. However, they did not always refer to the mere metallic, physical matter. Normally, they wanted to indicate with such a word the transmutation of the lead of the personality into the gold of the spirit. Therefore, it is convenient for us to reflect on all of these things. In the Gospels, the idea of the terrestrial man, the latter comparable to a seed that is capable of growth, has the same meaning as the idea of the rebirth of the man who is born once again. It is obvious that if the grain does not die, the plant is not born. Death and birth exist in every transformation. In Gnosis, we consider man to be like a factory of 3 floors, which normally absorbs 3 foods. Ordinary food corresponds to the inferior floor of the factory, is a matter of the stomach. Air, which is naturally in relation with the second floor, corresponds to the lungs. And impressions, which indubitably are associated with the third floor, or cerebrum. The food which we eat suffers successive transformations. This is unquestionable. The process of life in itself and by itself is transformation. Each creature of the universe lives by means of the transformation of one substance into another different thing. The plant, for example, transforms water, the air, and salts of the earth into new vital vegetable substances, into elements which are useful to us, such as nuts, fruits, lemons, etc. Therefore, everything is transformation. By the action of solar light, the ferments of nature vary. It is unquestionable that the sensitive film of life, which normally extends over the face of the earth, leads every universal force towards the very interior of the planetary world. But each creature, according to its species, transforms specific energies, which it then transmits into the interior of the earth for the economy of the world. Therefore, each creature that has existence fulfills the same functions. When we eat a food necessary for our existence, this latter is transformed, it is clear, from one phase to another, into all of those elements which are so indispensable for our existence. Who carries out those processes of transformation of substances within us? Obviously, the instinctive center. The wisdom of this center is really astonishing. Digestion in itself is transformation. The food in the stomach, in other words, in the inferior part of this 3-story factory of the human organism, suffers transformation. If something were to enter without going through the stomach, the organism would neither be able to assimilate its vitaminic principles nor its proteins. That would simply be an indigestion. As we reflect on this subject, we come to comprehend the necessity of undergoing a transformation. It is clear that physical foods are transformed, but there is something that invites us to reflection. Does an educated transformation of impressions exist within us? For the purpose of nature itself, there is no need whatsoever for the intellectual animal, mistakenly called man, to really transform impressions. But a man can transform his impressions by himself, by possessing naturally an in-depth knowledge, we would say, and he has to comprehend the reason for that necessity. It is magnificent to transform impressions. The majority of people, as seen in the field of practical life, believe that this physical world will give them what they yearn for and seek. Really, this is a tremendous error. Life in itself enters in us, into our organism, in the form of mere impressions. The first thing that we should comprehend is the significance of the esoteric work intimately related with the world of impressions. That we need to transform them? That is true. One could not really transform one's life unless one transforms the impressions which reach the mind. The persons who read these lines should reflect on what is being said here. We are talking about something very revolutionary, for the entire world believes that the physical is what is real. But if we go a little deeper, we see that what we are really receiving at each instant, at each moment, are mere impressions. If we see a person that pleases or displeases us, the first thing that we obtain are impressions of that nature. Isn't that true? This we cannot deny. Life is a succession of impressions, and not, as is believed by the learned ignoramuses, a physical thing of an exclusively materialistic type. The reality of life are its impressions. It is clear that the ideas that we are emitting are not very easy to grasp, to apprehend. It is possible that readers have the certainty that life exists as such and not as its impressions. They are so influenced by this physical world that obviously that is how they think. The person that we see seated, for example, on a chair there with this or that colored suit, the one who greets us, the one who smiles at us, etc., are for us really true. But if we meditate profoundly on all of them, we arrive at the conclusion that what is real are the impressions. The latter arrive naturally at the mind through the windows of the senses. If we did not have senses, for example, eyes to see, ears to hear, mouth to taste the foods which the organism ingests, would what is called the physical world exist for us? Of course not. Absolutely not. Life reaches us in the form of impressions, and it is there, precisely, where the possibility of working upon ourselves exists. Before all else, what should we do? We have to comprehend the work that we should do. How could we achieve a psychological transformation of ourselves? Well, by carrying out a work upon the impressions that we are receiving at each instant, at each moment. This first work receives the name of first conscious shock. This is related with these impressions, which is everything that we know of the exterior world. What size do true things, true persons have? We need to transform ourselves internally each day. Upon wanting to transform our psychological aspect, we need to work upon the impressions which enter into us. Why do we call the work of the transformation of impressions the first conscious shock? Because the shock is something that we could not observe in a merely mechanical way. This could never be done in a mechanical manner. One needs an auto-conscious effort. It is clear that when one begins to comprehend this work, one begins to cease being the mechanical man that serves the purposes of nature. If you now think about the significance of everything that you are taught here by means of your own efforts, beginning with the observation of oneself, you will see that on the practical side of the esoteric work, everything is intimately related with the transformation of impressions and with what naturally results from them. The work, for example, on negative emotions, on angry states, on identification, on self-consideration, on the successive I, on lying, on self-justification, on excuses, on the unconscious states in which we are, is all related with the transformation of impressions and what results from all of it. It will be convenient that in a certain manner the work upon oneself be compared to dissection in the sense of what a transformation is. It is necessary to form an element of change at the place of entry of impressions. Do not forget it. By means of the comprehension of the work, you can accept life as work will then really enter a constant state of self-remembering. The terrible realism of the transformation of impressions would naturally lead you to a better life as far as you are concerned, naturally, and they would no longer act upon all of you as they did at the beginning of your own transformation. But as long as you continue thinking in the same manner, receiving life in the same manner, it is clear that there will be no change in you. To transform the impressions of life is to transform oneself. This entirely new manner of thinking helps us to carry out such transformation. This entire discourse is exclusively based on the radical manner of transforming ourselves. If one does not transform oneself, nothing is achieved. You will comprehend naturally that life continuously demands that we react. All of those reactions form our personal life. To change one's life is really to change our own reactions. Exterior life reaches us as mere impressions that incessantly force us to react, we would say, in a stereotyped manner. If the reactions that form our personal life are all of negative type, then our own life will be negative also. Life consists of a successive series of negative reactions that happen as incessant responses to the impressions that reach the mind. Therefore, our task consists in transforming the impressions of life in such a manner that they do not provoke this type of negative response. But in order to achieve it, it is necessary to be observing ourselves from instant to instant, from moment to moment. It is urgent, therefore, to be studying our own impressions. One cannot allow impressions to reach us in a subjective and mechanical manner. If we begin with such control, this is equivalent to beginning life, to beginning to live more consciously. An individual can give himself the luxury of impressions not reaching him mechanically. Upon acting in this manner, he transforms the impressions, and then he begins to live consciously. The first conscious shock consists in transforming the impressions that reach us. If one manages to transform the impressions that reach the mind at the moment of entry, one obtains marvelous results that benefit our existence. One can still work on the result of the impressions. It is clear that they expire without mechanical effect, since this mechanicity is usually disastrous in the interior of our psyche. This Gnostic esoteric work should be taken to the point where the impressions enter, because they are mechanically distributed to wrong places by the personality to evoke old reactions. I will try to simplify this. As an example, let us use the following. If we throw a stone into a crystalline lake, impressions are produced in the lake, and the response of those impressions produced by the stone manifest in the form of waves that go from the center to the periphery. Now imagine the mind as a lake. Suddenly, an image of a person appears. That image is like the stone of our example that reaches the mind. Then the mind reacts in form of impressions. The impressions are those that the image that reaches the mind produces, and the reactions are the responses to such impressions. If a ball is thrown against a wall, the wall receives the impressions, then follows the reaction which consists of the return of the ball to the one who sent it. Well, it could be that it will return directly to the person, but by all means the ball bounces back, and that is reaction. The world is formed by impressions. For example, the image reaches our mind through the senses. We cannot say that the table has arrived or that the table has entered our cerebrum. That is absurd. But the image of the table is inside. Then our mind reacts immediately saying, "This is a wooden or metal table," etc. There are impressions that are not so pleasant. For example, the words of an offender. Isn't that true? Could we transform the words of an offender? Words are as they are. Therefore, what could we do? Transform the impressions which such words produce in us. And this is possible. The Gnostic teaching teaches us how to crystallize the second force, the Christ in us, through the postulate that says, one has to receive with gladness the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow men. In the previous postulate is found the way to transform the impressions which the words of an offender produce in us. Receive with gladness the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow men. This postulate will naturally lead us to the crystallization of the second force, the Christ in us. It will cause the Christ to come and take shape in us. If of the physical world we only know the impressions, then in reality the physical world is not so external as people believe. With just reason, Immanuel Kant said, the interior. If the interior is what matters, we should therefore transform the interior. The impressions are interior, therefore all objects and things, everything that we see, exists in our interior in the form of impressions. If we do not transform impressions, nothing will change in us. Lust, covetousness, pride, hatred, etc. exist in the form of impressions within our psyche, which vibrates incessantly. The mechanical result of such impressions have been all of those inhuman elements which we carry within and which we have normally called I, which in their mass constitute the myself, the one-self. Let us suppose, for example, that an individual sees a provocative woman and that he does not transform those impressions. The result will be that the same impressions, of a lustful type, produce in him the desire of possessing her. Such a desire is the result of the impression received, and it crystallizes, it takes shape in our psyche, and becomes one more aggregate, in other words, a new type of lustful I, which comes to add itself to the sum of inhuman elements which in their totality constitute the ego. Anger, covetousness, lust, envy, pride, laziness, and gluttony exist in us. Why anger? Because many impressions reached us, our interior, and we never transformed them. The mechanical result of such impressions of anger form the I's that exist and vibrate in our psyche, and which constantly make us feel anger. Why covetousness? Indubitably, many things awakened covetousness in us: money, jewels, material things of all types, etc. Those things, those objects, reached us in the form of impressions. We committed the error of not having transformed these impressions into different things, into an attraction for beauty, into happiness, etc. Such non-transformed impressions naturally became the I of covetousness which we now carry in our interior. Why lust? I already said that different forms of lust reached us in the form of impressions. In other words, there surged in the interior of our mind images of an erotic type whose reaction was lust. Since we did not transform those lustful waves, that unhealthy eroticism, naturally the result did not make itself wait. New morbid I's were born in our psyche. Therefore, today we have to work on the impressions which we may have in our interior and on its mechanical results. Within, we have impressions of anger, covetousness, gluttony, pride, laziness, and lust. We also have within the mechanical results of such impressions, a bunch of quarrelsome and vociferous I's, which we now need to comprehend and eliminate. Such work of our life consists in knowing how to transform impressions, and also in knowing how to eliminate the mechanical results of impressions that were not transformed in the past. The exterior world as such does not exist. What exist are impressions, and impressions are interior, and the reactions of such impressions are completely interior. No one could say that he is seeing a tree in itself. He may be seeing the image of a tree, but not the tree. The thing in it, as Immanuel Kant said, is not seen by anyone. One sees the image of things. In other words, the impression of a tree, of a thing, surge in us, and these impressions are internal. They are of the mind. If one does not carry out one's own internal modifications, the result will not make itself wait. The birth of new I's is produced, which come to enslave our essence, our consciousness, even more, which come to greater intensify the sleep in which we live. When one really comprehends all that exists within oneself with relation to the physical world, that they are nothing but impressions, one also comprehends the necessity of transforming those impressions, and upon doing so, the transformation of oneself is produced. There is nothing that hurts more than calumny or the words of an offender. If one is capable of transforming the impressions which such words produce in one, well then they remain without any value. In other words, they remain like a check drawn against insufficient funds. Certainly, the words of an insulter do not have any more value than that which the insulted person gives them. Therefore, if the insulted person does not give them any importance, I repeat, they remain like a check drawn against insufficient funds. When one comprehends this, then one transforms the impressions of such words, for example, into something different, into love, into compassion for the insulter, and this naturally means transformation. Therefore, we need to be incessantly transforming impressions, not only the present ones, but also the past and the future ones. Within us exist many impressions with which we committed the error of not having transformed them in the past, and many mechanical results of the same impressions, which are the so-called I that we now have to disintegrate, annihilate, in order for the consciousness to remain free and awake. It is indispensable to reflect on what I am saying. Things,
Persons are nothing but impressions within us, within our minds. If we transform those impressions, we transform our life radically. For example, when there is pride in one, that has ignorance as its basis. For a person, for example, to feel proud of his social position, of his money. But if this person, for example, thinks that his social position is a mere mental matter, that is, a series of impressions which have reached his mind, impressions about his social status, when he thinks that such status is nothing but a mental matter, or when he analyzes the question of his worth, he comes to realize that his position exists in his mind in the form of impressions.
Those impressions which money and social position produce are nothing but the external impressions of the mind. With the simple fact of comprehending that they are only impressions of the mind, there is transformation of the same. Then, pride by itself declines, collapses, and humility is born in us in a natural manner. Continuing the study of the processes of the transformation of impressions, I will proceed with something else. For example, the image of a lustful woman reaches the mind or surges in the mind. Such an image is an impression, that is obvious. We could transform that lustful impression through comprehension. It would be enough in that instant for us to think that that woman will one day die and that her body will become dust in the cemetery. And if with the imagination we saw her body in the process of disintegration in the grave, this would be more than sufficient to transform that lustful impression into chastity. If it is not transformed, it will be added to the other eye of lust. By means of comprehension, it is convenient that we transform the impressions which emerge in the mind. It is highly logical that the exterior world is not so exterior as it is normally believed. Everything that reaches us from the world is interior because they are nothing but internal impressions. No one could put a tree, a chair, a palace, or a rock into his mind. Everything reaches our mind in the form of impressions. That is all. The impressions from a world which we call exterior, and which is really not exterior as it is believed. It is undelayable that we transform impressions through comprehension. If someone greets us, praises us, how could we transform the vanity which this or that flatterer could provoke in us? Obviously, the praises, the flattery are nothing but impressions which reach our mind, and the latter reacts in the form of vanity. But if those impressions are transformed, vanity becomes impossible. How could the words of a flatterer be transformed? By means of comprehension. When one really comprehends that one is nothing but an infinitesimal creature in a corner of the universe, one immediately transforms by oneself those impressions of praise, flattery, or adulation into something different. One converts such impressions into what they are, dust, cosmic dust, because one comprehends one's own position. We know that the galaxy in which we live is made up of millions of worlds. What is the Earth? It is a particle of dust in the infinite. And if we were to say that we are some organic microorganisms of that particle, then what? If we were to comprehend this when we were flattered, we would carry out a transformation of the impressions related to the praise and flattery, or adulation, and as a result, we would not react in the form of pride. The more we reflect on this, more and more we will see the necessity of a complete transformation of impressions. All that we see as external is interior. If we do not work with the interior, we are treading the path of error because we will not modify our habits. If we want to be different, we need to transform ourselves integrally, and we should begin by transforming impressions. By transforming the animal and bestial impressions into elements of devotion, sexual transformation, transmutation, then surges forth in us. Unquestionably, this aspect of impressions deserves to be analyzed in a clear and precise manner. The personality that we have received or acquired receives the impressions of life, but does not transform them, because it is practically something dead. If the impressions fell directly upon the essence, it is obvious that they would be transformed because the essence would immediately deposit them exactly in the corresponding centers of the human machine. Personality is the term that is applied to everything that we acquire. It is clear that it translates impressions from all sides of life in a limited and practically stereotypical manner according to its quality and association. In this respect, in the Gnostic esoteric work, the personality is sometimes compared to a terrible secretary who is in the front office, who is occupied with all the ideas, concepts, preconceptions, opinions, and prejudices. It has many dictionaries, encyclopedias of all types, reference books, etc., and is not in communication with the centers, in other words, with the mental, emotional, and the physical centers, intellectual, motor, emotional, instinctual, and sexual, according to its unusual ideas. Consequently, or as a corollary, it so happens that it almost always puts itself in communication with wrong centers. This means that the impressions that arrive are sent to wrong centers, in other words, to places which do not correspond to them, producing naturally erroneous results. I will mention an example so that I will be better understood. Let us suppose that a woman attends to a gentleman with much consideration and respect. It is clear that the impressions that the gentleman is receiving in his mind are received by the personality, and the latter sends them to wrong centers. Normally, it sends them to the sexual center, and this gentleman gets to firmly believe that the lady is in love with him. And, as is logical, it does not take long before he rushes to make insinuations of an amorous type to her. Indubitably, if that lady has never had that kind of caring for the gentleman, with much reason, she cannot but feel surprised. This is the result of a terrible transformation of impressions. Here we see how bad a secretary the personality is. Unquestionably, the life of a man depends on this secretary who seeks transformation in its reference books without comprehending in the least what the event means, and consequently transmits, without preoccupations for what could happen, but feeling only that it is fulfilling its duty. This is our interior situation. What is important to comprehend in this allegory is that the human personality that we acquire, and which we should acquire, begins to take charge of our lives. Unquestionably, it is useless to imagine that this happens only to certain and specific persons. It happens to everyone, no matter who it is. One finds out in observation that numerous characteristic reactions exist which are produced by the impressions which reach us. These mechanical reactions, unfortunately, govern us. It is clear that each person in life is governed by life itself. It does not matter if he calls himself liberal or conservative, revolutionary or Bolshevik, good or bad in the sense of the word. It is obvious that these reactions before the impacts of the exterior world constitute our own life. In this sense, we can say in an emphatic manner that humanity is completely mechanical. Any man in life has formed for himself an enormous quantity of reactions which come to be the practical experiences of his existence. It is clear that every action produces its reaction, actions of a certain type, and such reactions are called experiences. The important thing would be, for example, in order to get to know better our actions and reactions, to be able to relax the mind. This mental relaxation is magnificent. To lie down on one's bed or on a comfortable armchair, to relax all the muscles patiently, and then empty the mind of all types of thoughts, desires, emotions, memories. When the mind is still, when the mind is in silence, we can know ourselves better. In such moments of stillness and mental silence is when we really come to experience in a direct manner the crude realism of all the actions of practical life. When the mind is in absolute repose, we see the multitude of elements and sub-elements, actions and reactions, desires, passions, etc., as something foreign to us, but which awaits the precise instant to be able to exercise its control over ourselves, over our personality. That is the reason why the silence and stillness of the mind is worthwhile. Obviously, the relaxation of the mind is beneficial in the most complete sense of the word, for it leads us to individual self-knowledge. So it is that all of life, in other words, exterior life, what we see and live, is for each person his reaction to the impressions which arrive from the physical world. It is a great error to think that what is called life is a fixed solid thing, and the same for each person. Certainly, there is not a single person who has the same impressions, which, with respect to life, exist in the human species, because they are infinite. Life, certainly, are our impressions of it, and it is clear that we can, if we so resolved it, transform such impressions. But as it was said, this is an idea which is very difficult to understand or comprehend, because the hypnotism of the senses is very powerful. Although it may seem incredible, all human beings are in a state of collective hypnosis. Such hypnosis is produced by the residual state of the abominable Kundart organ. When the latter was eliminated, the different psychic aggregates or inhuman elements, which in their mass constitute the myself, the one-self, these elements and sub-elements in turn condition the consciousness and keep it in a state of hypnosis. In this manner, therefore, hypnosis of a collective type exists. The entire world is hypnotized. The mind is engrossed in the world of the five senses and does not manage to comprehend how it could become independent of them. It firmly believes that it is a god. Our interior life, the true life of thoughts and feelings, continues being confused for our mere reasoning and intellective conceptions. Nonetheless, at the same time, we know very well that the place where we really live is our world of thoughts and feelings. This is something that no one can deny. Life is our impressions, and the latter can be transformed. We need to learn to transform our impressions. However, it is not possible to transform anything in us if we continue attached to the world of the five senses. As I have said in my treatise of revolutionary psychology, experience teaches one that if the Gnostic esoteric work is negative, it is due to one's own fault. It is from the sensorial point of view that this or that person of the exterior world whom one sees and hears through the eyes and the ears has the blame. This person in turn will say that we are the ones to blame. But really, the fault is in the impressions that we may have about people. Many times we think that a person is perverse when in reality the person is a humble lamb. It is very convenient to learn to transform all the impressions which we may have of life. We have to learn to receive with gladness the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow men.
The mental stomach. As we studied in the previous chapter, we know that there are three types of foods: those related with breathing, with food properly said, and with impressions. The digestion of food brings about, as a result, the assimilation of vital principles for the blood. The result of respiration is the assimilation of oxygen, which is so valuable for human life. The assimilation or digestion of impressions brings about, as a result, the absorption of energy finer than the other two. The five senses correspond to impressions. There are two types of impressions, pleasant and unpleasant. The human being needs to know how to live. But for that, he has to learn to digest and transform impressions, and this is vital for comprehension. We have to transform impressions if we truly want to know how to live. All impressions which reach the mind have hydrogen 48. Unfortunately, the human being lives mechanically. Man can transform hydrogen-48 into 24 to fortify the chakras, hydrogen-24 into 12 to fortify the mind, and hydrogen-12 into 6 to fortify the will. In actuality, one needs to transform the mind to move on to a new mental level, or otherwise, impressions will continue arriving at the same wrong places of always. People believe that they are able to see things from different angles and that they are sovereign, but they do not realize that the human mind is limited by preconceptions and prejudices. In these modern times, we need to transform the mental apparatus. We need to be different. The fabrication of a superior intellectual apparatus which is adequate to transform and digest impressions becomes urgent and necessary. In the same manner that the digestive apparatus has a stomach in order for food to be assimilated, and in the same manner that the respiratory system has lungs to assimilate oxygen, the mechanical man should create a mental stomach. Do not confuse it or interpret it as a physical one. Before digesting impressions, we have to transform them. The Gnostic teaching permits and facilitates the creation of said stomach in order to make of the intellectual animal something different. The necessity of transformation cannot be born without having comprehended such a necessity. This comprehension surges upon having the Gnostic teaching. When one thinks differently and positively about people, it is a sign that one is changing. We need to cease being what we are in order to become what we are not. One has to be lost to oneself. The result of all of this is the appearance of someone who is not oneself. In the path of transformation of impressions, we have to be sincere with ourselves, and we are not to persuade ourselves. In the beginning, there appears justification in us, but we need to study that such justification can be the fruit of self-esteem. We need to discover the causes and motives of our behavior before impressions. When impressions are transformed, everything becomes new. Only the masters of the occult fraternity can immediately transform impressions, whereas human machines do not transform them. The conscious man can modify situations brought about by past, present, and future impressions. If people are not capable of transforming circumstances, they will continue being toys of circumstances and of others. Life has an objective, and that is of a superior world. The Gnostic teachings teach how to live a superior world, how to live in a solar and immortal humanity. If one did not accept a superior world, transformation would have no purpose. That is obvious. The mind as it is now is not good for anything. One needs to organize it, remodel it, furnish it, etc. In other words, place it on a superior intellectual level. In order to be able to transform impressions, we need to reconstruct the scene just as it happened and find out what it was that hurt us the most. If there is no digestion of impressions, there will be any nourishment. If there is no nourishment, the existential bodies of the being will languish. The I is governed and nourished with hydrogen-48. Each day, each hour, new I are being continuously born. For example, mosquitoes bother us, the rain also, etc. There is always an addition and subtraction of I. Good impressions should also be transformed. If during the day one has had 3 impressions which have affected one's mood, they should be studied and transformed at night utilizing an orderly procedure. Each I is linked with others and they are associated. The I join together to form the same scene. We have to be analytical and judicious in order to transform impressions so that as a result, new faculties will appear. When persons do not transform themselves, they continue having a shameful and ridiculous state. Where there is no digestion, one is involuting. We have to digest the impressions of the same day. Do not permit the sun to set on your anger. We have to see things as they are. We have to create the mental apparatus, the mental stomach, which is convenient in order to not be victims of anything.